It all begins in a terrible world where the weak lose everything they own, including their wealth and status. And in this awful place, they even lose their very lives, just like this young man we see suffering. That's why his life is fading away, simply because he's too weak to survive in this desolate environment. The blue planet that was once home to all living things now faces a great threat. The world quickly became a huge, lifeless desert graveyard. With that, the few human survivors had no choice but to build their own fortresses. Inside the vehicle, our protagonist complains about why the invaders didn't just end everything at once. Suddenly, a strong jolt throws him violently against his seat before he can react. A man with a sinister smile and sharp teeth says his hand just slipped. Then, the big guy mockingly asks for the young man's name so he can apologize properly. On the ground but showing no fear, the boy answers that his name is Zeon. The man then starts laughing loudly with his friends, making fun of the boy's name. With a furious look, the young man glares at the brute, who notices the boy's irritation. The guy puts his arm around Zeon and tells him to calm down, as they're all in the same boat. He thinks everyone there is a criminal, and the brute asks what the boy's crime was. Without a second thought, Zeon answers with a powerful punch right to the bully's face. The force of the blow is so great that the man is thrown backward, hitting the other seats. The protagonist stands up, says the guy is mistaken, and asks if he wants to know what he did. With a serious expression and an intimidating glare, he reveals that his crime was taking someone's life. In a flashback to Neo-Seoul, he narrates that in his city, only the powerful are considered real people. The scene shows the man's body on the ground, and Zeon says he was a rat who tried to rob him. But before leaving, the guy reveals that his older brother is Lee Jae-young, and that he's in big trouble. Upon hearing the name Lee Jae-young, the young man's face fills with dread and despair. That's because if the powerful are people, then the awakened are the gods above them. The rumors that Lee Jae-young was hunting him spread, and he fled to the mines to hide. Back in the present, someone calls him, and the young man is pulled from his frightening thoughts. It was the bully he punched, now on his feet, wiping away blood and asking if he was done. The big guy notices a cut on his hand and is confused, not understanding how it happened there. At that moment, the bus shakes violently, and the young protagonist is thrown into the air. From the impact, he lands on his back, crying out in pain from the unexpected fall. The brute cracks his knuckles and says he's also here for the same reason, and that the kid has crossed the line. Suddenly, the man's expression changes to pure fear as he realizes he might have picked a fight with an awakened one. An orange aura surrounds him, and he says he'll teach him a lesson, because he's also an awakened one. Everyone on the bus is shocked as the man attacks the boy with all his strength. With the fight inside, the vehicle loses control and swerves sharply off the road. One of the passengers, with a bruised head, yells at the driver, asking why he isn't driving properly. But looking into the cabin, they realize the driver is unconscious over the steering wheel. The injured man holds his head in panic, wondering what the driver was talking about. He looks out the window with a look of pure terror upon seeing their situation, and the driver's last words echo, revealing they were never heading to the mines. The injured man, with a look of fury, can't understand what the driver was saying. Then he falls back in despair as he realizes the truth about their tragic fate. They were being swallowed by a gigantic sandworm that emerged from a hole in the desert. Inside the bus, chaos breaks out, and all the passengers are thrown from side to side. As he sinks into the sand, the protagonist thinks that in the end, it's always the same situation. He remembers being a child in Neo-Seoul, and how none of it was really special. Because in this world, it's normal for the strong to take everything from the weak, without mercy, and with tears in his eyes, he accepts that passing away like this is just part of the cycle. His hand reaches out as the maw closes, knowing it's all because he's a weakling. Suddenly, a strange triangle-shaped light appears in the darkness, and he says that this is such a clutchy eye. The boy laments, thinking that if he were a stronger awakened one, none of this would have happened to him. But to his surprise, his hand starts moving on its own in the middle of the desert sand. Then, A small whirlwind of sand forms around his hand and pulls him down. His eyes suddenly open with a golden glow, indicating that something has changed inside him. Submerged in the sand, the young man cries out in pain as his body undergoes an intense transformation. He feels like he's in a dark, empty place as he screams in agony without stopping for a second. Then, you can see his body becoming transparent, revealing his bones and veins of energy. On the desert surface, a few sharp rocks rise from the sand as if they were spikes. The young man opens his eyes again, but this time with a look of determination and sweat dripping down. In the background, the legendary Eiffel Tower is in ruins and almost completely covered by desert sand. And not far from there, a futuristic city is also destroyed and abandoned in the middle of nowhere. The reflection of all this destruction is seen in his eyes, now shining and full of power. Enormous broken and twisted concrete structures complete the scene of a devastated world. A single tear runs from his eye as he closes his eyelids for a moment. The planet is now a desert surrounded by a belt of asteroids floating in space. Inside his eye, an intense glow forms like a portal to another dimension or power. A sandstorm surrounds him, and he awakens a new ability called Sand Blaster. With his new power, he declares with conviction that he will survive in this world at any cost. Soon after, he appears inside a damp, dark cave, looking toward the lit exit. In this cursed world where everything has turned to sand, he is determined not to be defeated. So, covered in sand and with torn clothes, he stands up, ready to move forward. His eyes glow with a white light, and a serious, determined expression takes over his face. Facing giant sandworms, he reinforces his promise that he will survive everything. He feels his heart pound and every cell in his body tremble with the new energy flowing through him. Then, clenching his fist, he finally understands that what he's feeling is his awakening. At that moment, one of the giant worms turns in his direction, ready to attack the young man. The creature charges at high speed toward the young man, who remains standing in place. He prepares for combat and yells for the monster to come at him with everything it's got. But suddenly, a man in a trench coat appears and kicks him aside, saying he's in the way. A close-up on the newcomer's eye reveals a cold, calculating look for what's to come. With the force of the kick, the protagonist is thrown far away, flying over the sand rocks. He then lands hard in the desert sand, feeling the impact of the blow on his body. Getting up with difficulty, he wonders who that guy was, and when he got there, looking up, the young man gets a shocked and fearful expression from what he just saw. The mysterious man is on top of the monster and says it's scary being so high up. He then prepares to come down, saying he's going back to the first floor of that place. With his giant sword, he faces the horizon with the posture of a true warrior. In the blink of an eye, a powerful strike cuts the creature in half with devastating force. The protagonist is impressed by the scene and thinks that man's power is insane. He then wonders if that is the true power of a high-level awakened one. Suddenly, a blue-haired girl hugs him from behind and introduces him to Jang Yongbum, her leader. She continues to praise her leader while the young man is confused by the girl's sudden appearance. He notices his arm is getting cold and is amazed by the girl's unbelievable strength. The leader then gets the girl's attention, whose name is Giselle, and says that sandworms aren't tough. He gives a serious, disapproving look to his partner, who is still clinging to the young man. Giselle keeps holding the protagonist tightly while making a crying face at her leader. With a cheeky smile, she gives a military salute to her captain in a very casual way. Out of patience, the leader kicks both of them, sending them flying together across the desert, completely confused. They land hard in the sand, and the girl ends up falling right on top of the poor protagonist. The girl, sitting on the ground, excitedly asks what the young man's ability and rank are. But looking at his arm, she is surprised by what she sees, or rather, what she doesn't see. She asks the leader if the boy isn't an awakened one, and he, lying on the ground, denies it right away. The girl then points out that he doesn't have a rank insignia on his arm like everyone else. Lying in the sand, the young man is confused and wonders how an awakened one wouldn't have an insignia. A man in a military vehicle yells for them to get a move on because the sun is already setting. Giselle asks the leader what to do with the young man, and he complains that she almost ripped his arm off. The leader stares at the boy with a thoughtful look, trying to decide his fate. The protagonist, in turn, stares back at him with a nervous and expectant expression. The man then orders them to throw him in the vehicle, since he was probably going to the mines anyway. The military jeep speeds across the desert, kicking up a cloud of dust. Inside the car, the driver yells at the others for not listening to his warnings about the sunset. Meanwhile, the protagonist is tossed in the back of the vehicle, finding the ride comfortable. Lying on the car floor, he notices some sand moving strangely near him. A small amount of sand then starts to gush from the metal floor of the moving vehicle. With his hands tied, he sits up and realizes he can control the sand, confirming his ability. But he still wonders why his insignia can't be seen and notices that the color is different. Looking closer, he sees that the insignia on his arm is the same color as the desert sand. He then remembers that the insignia's light follows the class of each awakened one. Magic types like the blue-haired girl, for example, have a blue insignia. Combat types like the group's leader have a red insignia. There are awakened ones of other classes, but they are very rare to find in the world, and an ability to manipulate sand, like his, is something he has never heard of before. Even being F rank, he feels his new ability has endless possibilities ahead. With a confident smile on his face, he realizes the potential he has just awakened within himself. He then decides that he will wait and hide his power until it becomes completely his. With sand all around him, he declares that this world will now become his own stage of power. Upon reaching their destination, they find a mine surrounded by enormous, sharp rocks. The protagonist recognizes the place as the magic stone mine and notes that it looks quite normal. One of the men from the group yells for the young man to follow him and threatens him to keep quiet. He then leads him inside the place while the leader and Giselle watch the scene from a distance. The girl asks the leader if it isn't strange that he was the only survivor, but she thinks it's a coincidence. The man responds seriously and tells his partner that it was not a coincidence. He continues with a serious expression on his face, wondering what really happened there. The scene shows a hole in the sand, which is the trail left by the creature he defeated earlier. The leader regrets not having asked for the young man's name, but feels they will meet again. The night at the mine is bustling, with many people walking through the city's illuminated streets. The place looks like an underground city, with bars and common areas for the workers. The man who guided him lets him go and tells him to stay quiet and wait for the person in charge. The protagonist asks if he's just going to leave him there, and the man gets annoyed by the question. He then tells the young man to do whatever he wants and calls him an idiot, doubting his power. Alone and hungry, the young man decides to take a walk to look for a place to eat. He approaches a food stall and says, "Excuse me," to the man who is cooking there. Suddenly, his eyes widen in surprise when he sees something that catches his attention on the wall. It was a propaganda poster that said, "To light up Neo Seal with everyone's work." The old man at the stall notices his gaze and asks what he thinks of the city's beautiful slogan. With his hands on the table, he reveals that Neo Seal doesn't run on magic stones as everyone thinks. The young man is confused and asks what the energy source is if not magic stones. The old man then points to the protagonist and says that the real source of energy is him. He explains that people like the young man are the perfect energy source because they refuel on their own. The old man says that for a rookie, the young man knows a lot, and that at his age, everything sparks interest. He then asks what it was like to crawl inside a sandworm, and the young man is startled by the rumor. The old man warns him that he'll become worm food, but he replies that he came to earn money. With a smile, the old man says that's nonsense and invites him to see something interesting. The scene shows a shelf full of dusty, old boxes stored in a warehouse. The protagonist asks what's so interesting about junk, and the old man laughs, saying he collects things. With a dark look, he reveals that this is the fate of everyone who came to the mine, and his future. He says that everyone who arrives there resists entering the mine, but eventually gives in over time. Desperate, they sell everything they own, and even themselves, to try to survive in the place. But in the end, nothing is solved, and the little they have dwindles until everyone meets the same fate. The old man concludes that junk only leaves behind more junk, unlike people who leave a name. Annoyed, he holds the skewer, and the old man says he's curious to see what he will leave behind. The young man throws the skewer on the table and asks the price, and the man says it costs 10 sol. The boy is stunned by the price, and the old man explains that everything there is very rare and expensive. With a smirk, he scoffs at the price and says there's no way he can pay that amount. Just then, a group of angry men approaches, thinking he's trying to skip out on the bill. They surround him with knives and cleavers in hand, ready for anything, without fear. Even though he's scared, the young man stands firm and repeats that he can't pay that much for it. He looks around with concern as he sees the men getting closer and closer to him. The tension in the place rises as he analyzes the dangerous situation he's gotten himself into. The old man then asks if the young man didn't find it strange that he has a business open in the mine. The scene shows the young man being held by a shadow, while surrounded by eyes and blades. With a sinister smile, the man asks what he plans to do now that he's cornered. Tired of the conversation, the young man slams his hand on the table, showing all his irritation. He tells the man to calm down, as there's no way he can pay such an absurd price for the meat. The old man smiles and tells him not to worry, as they can trade for something else. At that, he points to the magic stone in the boy's pocket and says that will do as payment. The young man is shocked and wonders how the rumor about the magic stone spread so quickly. The old man holds out his hand and tells him to hand over the stone, promising to give him a fair price. But the young man refuses, remembering everything he went through to protect that item. He tries to negotiate but is interrupted by a giant hand that grabs his head forcefully. The brute squeezes his head violently, showing not an ounce of mercy. One of the goons yells for the old man to stop listening and just finish the kid off. In his mind, he uses Sand Blaster and neutralizes the hand of the man holding him. He then imagines a powerful punch that sends the goon flying with a single blow. And in his imagination, all the men have their arms neutralized and are in shock. He sees himself using his sand power to attack all the enemies at the same time. His vision ends with his shadowy face, and his eyes glowing with immense power. Back in reality, someone is shaking him and calling his name to wake him up. It was one of the goons, asking if he was okay because he was just standing there for a while, and he gets annoyed. The young man then slams the magic stone on the table with force, getting the old man's attention. And with a defiant look, he says there is the mana stone the old man wanted so badly. The man picks up the stone and examines it carefully, thinking about how much it could be worth. He says it's worth 100 sol, and the young man explodes with anger, shouting that it's worth at least 300. The man reminds him that everything there is precious and taunts him about his fate as worm food. At that, one of the goons grabs him and throws him hard onto the table to restrain him. He thinks he could take out the old man, but decides it's not the right time for that yet. With a smile, he gives in and just asks for a decent amount of change for the item. The old man warns him about pickpockets, and he thinks he already has one right in front of him. The old man then says that since it's their first deal, he can choose one item as change. He points to the shelf of junk and says the young man can take anything he wants. The young man enters the storage room and complains that the place is a junkyard with nothing impressive. The old man watches the boy and thinks he's an interesting fellow and that there must be something of value there. He admires the young man's vitality and obsession with not losing out in any kind of deal. While searching, the young man finds a rat mask with whiskers and puts it on his face. He finds a strange pair of goggles, and the old man says they were left by a caravan a long time ago. He then finds an ancient hourglass, and besides, he'll take that item as his change. The old man comments that he has an interest in useless things, and the young man agrees mockingly. Before leaving, He turns around and asks the name of the old man who owns the place. The man shouts his name, which is Clexy, with a friendly smile and says goodbye to the boy. The protagonist turns around with a smile and says he hopes he never sees that old man again. Clexy laughs and says they'll still see each other around as he watches him walk away. Back in his room, the young man places the hourglass on a table to get a better look at it. He notices that the sand inside it will run out in about 10 minutes and becomes thoughtful. In the miner's dormitory, he sits on the floor and starts doing breathing exercises. With his eyes closed, he breathes in and out deeply to calm down and concentrate. He continues the breathing exercise with a serious and focused expression on his goal. With his eyes glowing, he holds the hourglass and, with willpower, orders it to move. But to his surprise, nothing happens, and he sees himself reflected in the glass of the ancient object. He gets annoyed and realizes the item has no connection to his power awakening. With his hand on his face, he thinks that even though it's the first time he's seen the object, something is strange. He feels a strange sense of déjà vu, as if he already knows that hourglass from somewhere. He feels that it was prepared for him and is calling to him. But a new emotion suddenly invades him. A strong man kicks the door down and yells, asking if he's the new guy who just arrived. The man, named Park Man-ho, confronts him, furious that he didn't come crawling to the mine. The protagonist cuts him off and says they should have told him where to go and that his name is Zeon. Without hesitation, the young man attacks Man-ho with a spinning kick to the face, but is blocked by his arm. Zeon clenches his fist in anger, ready to counter the attack from the man who interrupted him. But Man-ho is faster and lands a powerful punch right in the young man's face with all his might. He grabs him and yells, asking if he thinks he can take him on, and if this is a joke to him. With a hateful glare, he says that trash like him should just take a beating quietly and not fight back. Man-ho then stops the attack and tells the boy to follow him quickly if he got the message. Lying on the floor, the protagonist just watches the man walk away without saying a word. With a furious look and a vengeful smile, he swears he will remember Park Man-ho. The scene shows the entrance to the mine in Sector 3, with a train stopped on the iron tracks. Man-ho hands the young man over to another miner and tells them to give him the necessary equipment. The miner explains that the cost of the equipment will be deducted from his daily pay at the mine. The protagonist is about to ask something, but is interrupted by a sudden loud noise. Man-ho smashes the boy's helmet with a hammer, making it clear who's in charge. He threatens him with a pickaxe and says the cost of the helmet will also be deducted from his pay. He then orders them to send the rookie to pit 972, and the miner is startled by the order. The brute yells, demanding an answer, and the boy quickly agrees to go to the location. Man-ho threatens to finish him if he doesn't bring back the stones, and the young man walks away grumbling, not paying him much mind. Walking through the huge cave, his colleague comments that the boy was unlucky to run into Man-ho on a bad day. Zeon is surprised by the vices of the place, and the miner explains that you can find everything there, just like in Neo Seoul. Going down the elevator, the boy scoffs at the brute, and his colleague laughs at our protagonist's boldness. The young man complains that his skin is too sensitive for heavy labor, but the miner reassures him about it. The colleague then explains that no one gets hurt in that sector, and soon they reach their final destination. Getting out of the elevator, the guide introduces pit 972, which looks quite abandoned. Behind the bars, the man says the young man will never come back from that dark and scary place. The guide says that several people have disappeared in that location, and no one has any idea what happened to them. With that, the coworker apologizes for leaving him there and thanks him as he leaves alone. At that, the man feels very sorry for having to send the boy to a place everyone is terrified to go. The protagonist screams in desperation, realizing the danger, and begs not to be left in that inferno. Looking up, the young man is in shock, noticing he was really abandoned at the bottom of the hole. Overcome with fury, he starts mining forcefully while cursing everyone who put him in that situation. But during a rage-filled swing, the tip of the pickaxe simply breaks off and flies far away. The boy panics and tries to reach the tool, knowing he needed it to work there. Walking deep into the cave, he observes the sinister environment, wondering what bizarre place this is. He realizes the magical energy in the air is too dense and deduces that the others didn't notice because they are ordinary. The fog gets thicker, and he questions where all this absurdly strong magic is coming from. At that moment, our protagonist notices something on the ground and quickly approaches to check it out. He finally finds the lost tip of his pickaxe lying among the dark rocks of the cave. Stepping firmly, he celebrates finding the broken piece, thinking his luck was starting to change. However, the ground suddenly gives way, and the young man falls straight into a strange reddish energy vortex. The boy's eyes widen in complete shock as he feels his body being sucked into the unknown. Falling into a dark tunnel, he panics, trying to understand if this is some kind of portal. He then lands with great violence on the stone floor, his whole body hitting with a strong impact. Next to him, his mining helmet and the broken tool roll through the dust on the floor. In a sad memory, we see the boy abandoned in the rain while neighbors whisper mean things about him. He remembers the time he used to get beaten up just for stealing a piece of meat to avoid starvation. Next, we see the young man running desperately from furious goons after stealing valuable items from them. Then comes the scene where he takes out the man who tried to rob him and discovers that his life was in danger. He just wanted a quiet life, but ended up being hunted by Lee Jae-young's cruel assassins. With his face full of tears, he wishes to fight for a normal life and snaps out of this emotional trance. Back in the present, the boy begins to regain consciousness, lying face down in the cave's dust. Getting up with a severe headache, he complains about the unbearable heat and the stuffy air of the place. He rubs his hand on the dark, stained floor and wonders if all that dirt is just ash. At that moment, our protagonist looks up and freezes completely at what appears before him. Breaking into a cold sweat, he realizes the gravity of the problem, deducing the true destination of the reddish portal. The scene opens up to reveal a colossal landscape full of magma and flames, proving that he is in a dungeon. Suddenly, a jet of white energy shoots up from the ground right in front of him, taking him completely by surprise. He picks up a smoking rock and feels the extreme heat of the place burning his sensitive skin, but the boy quickly drops the object while screaming in pain, as the rock was too hot to hold. Blowing on his injured hand, he comes to his senses and realizes that this is not a nightmare, but a dungeon. Looking at his ash-covered hand, the young man deduces that his lungs will melt if he stays too long. Without wasting any time, our protagonist ties his boots tightly, preparing for the worst that is to come. At that, he ties a cloth over his face to protect his breathing and thinks that every dungeon must have an exit. Looking toward the horizon, the young man spots a giant mountain of fire and assumes the exit is at the top. With a determined look, he realizes that standing still is a certain end and decides to move forward as quickly as possible. He then starts running with all his might, planning to cross that inferno by the shortest route. In a courageous leap, he dodges the flames, deciding he will never bow his head or give up on living. After landing on a rock at the edge of the magma, he sighs in relief for having escaped his demise by a hair's breadth. But the ground warps under his feet, and the young man slips, falling dangerously toward the river of boiling lava. In a panic, the boy reaches out his hand, sweating profusely and begging for a miracle to avoid melting in that heat. By sheer luck, he manages to grab onto the stone wall just above the magma and avoids a tragic end there. Even while hanging and terrified by the heat, the young man tries to convince himself that all this fire doesn't scare him. With great effort, he climbs back to a safe spot and falls to his knees on the ground, panting and tired. The boy slams his fist on the ground with force, showing all his frustration for going through such an ordeal. Full of anger, he curses the brute's name to the heavens, swearing revenge when he gets out of that place alive. Getting up, the protagonist realizes that anger only makes the intense heat worse and tries to control his feelings. Clutching his own sweaty clothes, he focuses on his survival and vows to fight tooth and nail until the end. Assessing the dangerous path, The young man calculates that he will only need to make 4 more long jumps to succeed. The path to the volcano is long and frightening, but the boy knows he will reach the top if he focuses on each step. With his mind focused, he tightens the cloth on his face, telling himself to just keep moving. He takes off at a full sprint, determined not to let his life end in that lethal pit. Challenging his own limits, the young man extends his hand and bravely presses forward, vowing never to stop fighting. But during the jump, a terrible giant creature emerges from the magma, opening a huge maw to devour him. The colossal monster erupts from the lava, spreading destruction and revealing the true danger of that dungeon. In a violent dive, the beast returns to the river of fire, raising a giant wave of flames around it. The creature's rocky, armored body becomes visible, showing that facing such a being would be impossible. The absurd heat causes rocks to melt around the beast, revealing a mysterious glow on its armored body. The boy lands safely and pulls the mask from his face, desperate from the infernal heat that fills the air. At that, he looks at his arm and realizes he managed to manipulate the volcanic ash to save his life. However, the effort takes its toll, and he slides down a stone slope, feeling exhausted and out of breath. Lying on the hot stone, the boy understands that this place is more dangerous than any magical beast there. Sweating profusely, he notices he can't breathe properly as his consciousness slowly begins to fade. Completely paralyzed on the dark cave floor, the poor young man wonders if this is really his end. But gathering his final energy, he clenches his fist tightly, completely refusing the idea of giving up. The young man pushes himself up from the ground and grumbles that he can't go out like this, as he's never even dated a girl. With iron determination, he stomps his foot on the ground, taking his first step to continue his journey. Manipulating the dark sand, the boy warns that the monster will have to settle for a different kind of snack. The gigantic beast opens its enormous mouth full of sharp teeth, ready to devour the young man in one bite. Faced with this terrifying sight, he just closes his eyes and screams in desperation, waiting for his end. A mysterious voice from above compliments his ability, and the boy immediately becomes suspicious of who it might be. The young man looks up, shocked and annoyed, as the person mocks his sand, controlling power. To his total surprise, that same mysterious old man appears, falling from the heavens like a comet. With a wide, confident smile on his face, the man quickly approaches the terrible creature of fire. The young man can't believe what he's seeing, and is impressed to see the old man plummeting at high speed. Without hesitation, the old man prepares a powerful punch, clenching his fist to strike the colossal monster. With brutal fury, the old man brings down his devastating blow, smiling as if it were a game. The impending impact makes the protagonist flinch in fear, dreading the shockwave to come. A huge explosion of energy erupts in the center of the cave, splitting the stone and magma floor in half. The force of the attack is so overwhelming that it shatters the entire surrounding terrain, sending pieces everywhere. Large boulders and debris fly through the air, creating a scene of complete destruction in the dungeon. The boy is thrown far by the violent gust of wind and screams as he tries to shield himself from the debris. Fallen and dazed, he holds his head in pain, feeling like his eardrums almost burst from the blast. Still dizzy, the young man looks at the scene in awe and tries to focus on the presence of that incredibly strong man. He realizes that the fire giant was completely annihilated with a single brutal blow from the old man. Shocked, the boy understands that the old man's power is on a level completely beyond ordinary reality. The man stands up amidst the flames, his eyes glowing red like a true divine being. Walking slowly through the magma, the mysterious man approaches the boy, who is still on the ground. With heavy steps cracking the floor, the old man faces the protagonist and asks who he really is. The young man is confused by the sudden approach, and the man clarifies that he just wants to know his name. With a frightening smile, the old man says he has until the count of 3 to answer his question. Without waiting long, the powerful old man begins to count, and the boy panics at the threat. Time passes in the blink of an eye, and the pressure in the air increases, making the atmosphere even more terrifying. The young man's eyes reflect the pure terror, of having his life threatened again on the same terrible day. The impatient old man declares that time is up as he stares at the young man with a very intimidating expression. Drawing his immense sword, he warns that if the boy doesn't speak, he will take much more drastic measures. The old man's eyes glow blood red, and he decrees the young man's end without a hint of pity. Desperate, the protagonist holds out his hands, begging for mercy and assuring that he can indeed speak normally. Backing away in fear, he shouts his name is Zeon very loudly to avoid being sliced in half right there. The old man finds the name stupid, and the young man is indignant, wondering what this arrogant fellow's name could be. In a swift and lethal movement, the old man attacks, creating a monstrous cutting line that destroys the floor. Sheathing his weapon, the man introduces himself as Devour, while the young man covers his ears from the blast. The young man's eyes widen in fear as the powerful Devour questions him about his recent actions. Very confused, the protagonist asks why he is being insulted and threatened like that without end. He even thanks him for being saved, but gets annoyed and demands to know what he did wrong to deserve this. Sitting on the ground, the old man ignores the complaint and says the young man fell into a big trap without realizing it. He then explains that this place is created by the dungeon to relieve the excess accumulated magical energy. The old man explains that this phenomenon also creates a dangerous living creature known as a trap. He laughs, saying that normal people never see this, and Zeon curses Park Manhwa for his bad luck. The old man calls him an idiot again, and the boy retorts, telling him to stop with the insults. Sighing, the old man grabs the boy's face and tells him to concentrate all his mana into his own eyes. Zeon tries to complain, but Devour tells him to be quiet and increase the purity of his magical energy. He explains that the young man must see using mana instead of his eyes and feel the energy around him. With that, the young man's eyes widen in shock as he finally manages to see what was in front of him. Terrified, he wonders what that is, and the man smiles, noticing that the boy managed to see. Devour reveals that it is a beast with stealth that takes out its prey before they even realize anything. The boy is stunned for not having sensed any presence of the monster that was right there. He realizes that if it weren't for the old man's help, he would have easily perished without even knowing why. Having his life saved twice in a single day, he begins to question who this man really is. Observing the old man's imposing posture, the young man is impressed and wonders just how strong he is. At that, he asks for the old man's identity, who quickly gets annoyed and repeats that his name is Devour. Frustrated, the young man yells, asking what kind of person he is to have so much power and where they are. The powerful man states that this is a dungeon, and now it is also his private hunting ground. With a sinister smile, he tells the boy to use his own eyes and discover his identity. Looking closely, the young man focuses on the old man's giant sword and notices a word engraved on the weapon. Suddenly, a huge wave of flames and magma erupts, startling the boy again. Frightened, he covers his ears from the deafening roar and wonders what is happening. In shock, he raises his head and tries to understand what that crazy old man just did this time. His eyes widen as he sees dozens of terrifying birds, made of pure fire flying through the skies. Amidst all that chaos of flames, the mysterious old man yells, calling the young man an idiot again. Holding his sword firmly, he warns that if the young man has any worth, he will have to survive there alone. The boy curses the crazy old man as one of the fearsome firebirds dives in his direction. Zeon desperately tries to dodge but realizes these winged creatures are incredibly fast. In a quick reflex, he raises his arms and manages to defend himself from a direct attack by the monsters. But the force of the impact is so great that he is pushed back, dragging his feet across the dark stone floor. Surrounded by the flames, he curses the creatures for being so agile and gets furious that they only attack one side. Clicking his tongue, the young man extends his arm and launches a jet of dark sand to attack the monsters. The blow hits the firebird's head on, but they don't seem to take much damage from the sand. Immediately, the beasts retaliate, and the boy is hit violently, letting out a cry of pain. Protecting his face, He realizes that neither the sand nor his eyes can keep up with their speed. Taking hits from all sides, he panics, knowing he will perish if he stays there. He remembers that the old man already saved his life, and thinks he would be a real idiot if he passed away now. Fallen and exhausted, he hears a strange voice in his head, suddenly catching his attention. The old man yells, and the boy replies that his eardrums are hurt, and he can't hear the words clearly. Desperate, the young man tries to come up with a plan while the fire burns, and the old man continue their insults. He remembers Deodan's warning and decides to close his eyes, trying to stay calm in the midst of the chaos. Remembering the advice, he decides to gather all his magical power in his eyes and focus on purifying his mana. Zeon concentrates the magical energy in his eyes as the old man instructed and focuses on the mana. At that, one of the fire birds dives fiercely towards him to attack, but the young man manages to dodge the swift attack, jumping aside just in time. Now seeing through mana, the boy perceives everything around him with clarity. He can predict the beast's movements through the routes of magical energy. With this advantage, the young man lands a direct punch on the winged fire monster, and the force of the impact completely shatters the creature of flames in that same instant. However, the giant monster returns, and the old man jumps with full force to attack the deadly beast. The old man lets out a laugh, very excited by the intense and devastating battle. He then fires a colossal beam of light at the dungeon floor. Smiling like a madman, the powerful man asks them to send much bigger challenges. The brutal beam cuts the giant magma monster in half without any difficulty. With that, the enormous head of the rocky beast falls lifelessly to the destroyed ground. The experienced warrior sheathes his weapon, complaining that it all ended up being too easy. He sighs in frustration, greatly missing the challenges of his youth. Watching everything from a distance, the young man is perplexed by the master's sheer brute force. Being in front of that chaotic scene leaves the boy completely speechless. Then he gives a sheepish smile, hoping the threat is over for good. But his expression soon changes to absolute panic at what is approaching. The lava lake erupts, revealing a new and terrible threat in the area. The pressure in the air becomes so strong that the young man falls to his knees in great pain. He crawls on the ground, trying to withstand the crushing weight of the environment around him. The old man calmly warns that the frightening sound was the roar of the big boss. A monstrous paw is revealed in the fire, proving to be the main core of the dungeon. An immense dragon awakens, spreading blue flames throughout the underground cavern. Completely terrified, the protagonist realizes the grand scale of the creature. The old man just smiles, excited to finally find a worthy opponent. The winged beast roars furiously, demonstrating its frightening power to the invaders. The warrior explains that the creature is just a pseudo-dragon, classified as Class B. The young man freezes in fear upon learning the high level of the threat before his eyes. The giant beast activates a force field of bluish energy around its entire body. The master compliments the boy's knowledge of the world's high-level monsters. He says that a red color on the shield would be for direct melee combat only, but the blue force field means the colossal beast is focused solely on magic. Suddenly, the monster fires an extremely devastating freezing magic attack. The young man despairs at the size of that creature's absurd attack, but the old man leaps and cuts the freezing beam with his enormous, shining sword. The boy watches the scene, completely amazed by the brave man's skill. He realizes that all his experience on the violent streets is useless here. Faced with the absurd strength of that man, the protagonist feels like a mere, useless insect. The master advances, cutting through the air, and attacks the pseudo-dragon with a gigantic light ray from his sword. But the creature doesn't back down and tries to hold back the attack with its sharp claws in a contest of strength. With that, the warrior wastes no time and performs a swift horizontal cut to continue the offensive. At that moment, the man smiles excitedly as he loves a good battle and the adrenaline of combat. The beast opens its enormous mouth and begins to charge a powerful, glowing blue sphere of energy. Seeing this, the old man grins widely, showing his sharp teeth and getting even more excited. Then, the monster fires the magic attack with full force, trying to hit its powerful opponent. The man lets out a very loud laugh and mocks the creature, ironically asking if that hurts. Holding his weapon firmly, he states that he will be the one to put an end to that pain. With a deadly look, the warrior decrees that today will be the funeral day for that immense dragon. Desperate, the protagonist shouts that he's actually the one who's going to end up buried that day. The young man runs with all his might, trying to escape while the monster releases another ice beam. He looks back and tries to resist the brutal shockwaves that the battle is causing in the area, but the impact of the collision is so strong that the boy ends up being thrown far away, like a doll. The young man slides violently across the stone floor, feeling that even from a distance, the fight is very deadly. With difficulty, he tries to stay on his feet while the strong gust from the explosion almost knocks him over. In the air, the old man just laughs nonstop and comments on how extremely fun all of this is. The dragon attacks again, and the experienced masters says the place is more like an amusement park. A gigantic fire explosion occurs when the two collide in an attack of absurd proportions. The protagonist is in the middle of the chaos as energy spikes tear through the ground right in front of him. Frightened, he stares at the ground shattering all around. Realizing the situation is getting much worse, he curses his own luck with an expression of pure despair in the face of all that destruction. At that, the young man can't take the pressure and ends up falling straight into a deep hole in the midst of the chaos. The boy tumbles violently down the inclined floor, taking several hits during the dangerous fall. He is then thrown off a cliff, completely losing control of his body. Lying on the blood-stained ground, he is paralyzed and in a state of shock after taking so much impact. The young man's vacant stare shows just how exhausted and injured he is in this near-fatal situation. The boy plummets into the hot abyss while the monster and the warrior continue their deadly fight above. But the old man continues to taunt the dragon and asks if that weak attack is all it can do. He claims that the crawling creature is a real disgrace and doesn't deserve the title of boss there. Enraged, the monster prepares once more and fires another bright and destructive energy beam. The experienced fighter smiles and says ironically that even a beast like that knows a few tricks, and without backing down, he launches a crushing vertical attack to intercept the creature's magic blow. The clash of the two powers creates a blindingly bright white light that covers the entire hot cavern. The monster takes most of the impact and ends up pulling its huge head back from the oppressive force. The beast looks around, trying to find its opponent, and the master appears by surprise, announcing his presence. The master's sword glows dark red and comes down heavily against the pseudo-dragon's body. The colossal being lets out an immense roar of pain as it's crushed by the fighter's absurd strength, with his sword stuck in the creature. The man says he spent the whole year roaming the desert after it. The man explains that he came to capture it, and thus forge a weapon using the monster's heart. The white-haired warrior, with a serious look, states that this was enough and tells it to perish. The heavy sword embedded in the stone floor suddenly begins to emit a strong magical glow. The magic weapon then starts to absorb the red life energy from the core of the defeated monster. The sword's enormous blade shines intensely in a crimson red, covered by a powerful aura. The scarlet glow spreads across all the runic details carved into the heavy combat weapon. The warrior admires his sword absorbing all the beast's power with a huge smile on his face. The red energy creates a frightening aura around the weapon, which now seems even more dangerous. Wielding the red blade, the old man admires the result of his work, showing great satisfaction. Laughing very loudly, he praises the sword, calling it clean and saying it has become stronger. Hiding, the young man watches him in surprise and questions if he's just a crazy old man talking to weapons. The old man notices the young man crawling along the edge and asks in admiration if the boy managed to survive. The boy responds exhaustedly, confirming that he almost kicked the bucket in that completely inhospitable environment, but the ground suddenly gives way, and the poor protagonist plummets into the volcano's hot abyss. The young man's expression fills with horror as he falls toward the unknown once more. In a panic, he holds his own head, screaming desperately at the imminent fall. He quickly reacts and uses his sand ability to try to avoid a terrible fate. With the sand cushioning, he manages a rough landing, creating a crater in the stone floor. Lying on his back, panting and sweaty, he realizes he is quite persistent for surviving yet again. He claims his reflexes have improved because of the chaos, and the old man smiles, praising the boy. Deoden grabs the boy by his clothes, warning that the dungeon is about to collapse, and they need to escape quickly. Being dragged along, the young man understands nothing and questions why the warrior is holding him. The experienced fighter just lets out a genuine laugh, having a lot of fun with the unusual situation. Without thinking, the crazy old man throws the young man into a hole and says goodbye, calling him an idiot. Flying through the air, the protagonist curses the old man with all his anger, saying he's worse than Park Manhwa. The boy face plants in the sand of an unknown desert, completely stunned by the change of scenery, spitting out sand. He tries to get up near a strange reddish portal floating in the area. As he cleans his mouth, the old man exits the rift, warning that this is the exit created by the dungeon's end. With a stern expression, the warrior approaches and tells the boy to pay close attention. He says he needs his sand power, but the young man is too weak, so he will offer him a choice. Pointing to the horizon, he indicates the path back to a mediocre life in the city of Neo-Seoul. Or, the boy can follow him on his dangerous journey and become a much stronger warrior. Surprised, the young man asks how long this training with the mysterious Deoden would last. The old man answers honestly that it could take months or even dozens of uncertain years. Looking the boy in the eye, the man presses him and tells him to make his final decision immediately. He needs to choose between his old, comfortable, quiet life or bet everything, risking his end. With the options on the table, the warrior focuses on the protagonist with an intimidating glare, awaiting his answer. With a mocking smirk, the boy finds the idea of having a choice in this situation ridiculous. Then, he points to the old man and asks if the experienced warrior has completely lost his mind. The young man questions if he should really leave a comfortable life to wander the desert with the man. Deoden confirms with a serious look that this was exactly what he was proposing to the boy. The protagonist looks away and says that there's nothing left for them to discuss. But to the old man's surprise, he turns around and states that he has decided to follow the warrior on his journey. The boy explains that he has a vengeful streak when he gets angry, but he isn't strong enough yet. With a challenging smile, he warns that this includes getting revenge on the old man himself one day. He admits the old man is the strongest person he's ever seen, and that he'll probably never find another like him. The master laughs at the young man's audacity and asks if he's sure he won't end up in a bad way. Zeon then clenches his fist, convinced that if he follows the man, he will become the strongest of all. The warrior smiles and warns that this certainty will one day make the boy bitterly regret his choice. The old man tells him to follow, calling him an idiot, but the boy shouts back for him to stop the insults. The two begin their journey under the scorching sky and heavy clouds of a merciless desert. But it doesn't take long for the young man to start shouting from exhaustion, begging them to slow down. Fallen to his knees, he points out that they've been walking for 6 straight hours and desperately need a break. However, the experienced warrior continues his steady walk, completely ignoring his apprentice. The boy flies into a rage and yells at the master, saying he's like a spoiled girl with an unstable mood. With sweat pouring down his face, he notices the absurd heat and guesses the temperature must be around 50 degrees. His feet sink into the hot sand, and he knows he'll get heat stroke if he keeps walking like this. The old man calls him a complete fool and complains that he isn't using even 1% of his great power. Deoden reminds him that he can control the sand and finds it pathetic that he's struggling to walk on it. The boy desperately yells that it's easy for him to say since he only awakened his powers a very short time ago. The master glares at the young man with disdain and indifferently asks What the problem is with all this? Xion complains that he's just an F rank, not a high-level awakened being like the old warrior. Furious, the man grabs him and yells at him to stop talking nonsense, because rank doesn't mean a thing. He asks if the boy thinks people are just born S rank and says that's merely a blessing. The master shouts that he is also blessed and shouldn't give up just because he wasn't born at the top. The young man stares at the imposing warrior and reflects on the word blessed spoken by the old man. The man tells him to stop whining and use his brain to figure out how to use his ability. With a determined look, the boy understands that this power is his and his alone. The master explains that he needs to discover for himself how to break his limits and use his own strength. The old man punches him in the arm, and the boy grumbles as the man says he's got the point now. With that, the warrior walks away and warns that if he doesn't figure out how to use his power, he'll meet his end right there. Looking at his own foot sinking into the sand, the young man starts to think of a solution to the problem. He then concentrates, and the sand around him begins to stir under his magical control. The boy realizes his control extends to a 5-meter radius and thinks that will be enough. He understands that if he solves the problem of sinking into the sand, he'll be able to save a lot of energy. The protagonist gets the idea to use his power to compress the sand beneath his feet, making it firm. The tactic works, and now he can walk with ease, running happily towards his master. But he soon realizes that the mana consumption is very high, and that this won't work in the long run. The young man then thinks about concentrating the mana in his legs, and the master notices that walking has become easier now. The old warrior thinks that youth is a good thing and notices the boy isn't using his ability. Just then, the boy falls face first into the sand, but the master admires his persistence in never giving up. The man notes that despite being F rank, the boy's power and mana control are already at an E to D level. With a shout of joy, the protagonist finally celebrates that his new technique worked perfectly. He runs to the old man and explains that he only controlled the sand at his feet, and now walking is very easy. Sticking his tongue out, he teases the old man, saying he can now walk comfortably through the desert. But his celebration is cut short by a powerful punch to the head from his master. As he lies on the ground, the old man warns him not to waste unnecessary energy, or else he'll be done for. The warrior tries to wake the boy up, saying they don't have time, and shouts for him to breathe. The boy wakes up dazed in the middle of darkness and wonders where he is at that moment. The master announces that the young man is awake and complains that because of him, he lost precious time. With his whole body aching, he notices his injuries and is startled when a piece of meat is thrown at him. The protagonist stares at the piece of dried meat tossed on the sand. Not understanding what's happening, the old man tells him to eat, while he listens to a story from when the experienced warrior was young. He says that in the old days, even the weak survived, and people took pride in protecting them. The old man laments that the world has changed, and he never got used to the new, cruel reality of today. With a serious look, the master warns that if he wants to give up, he can stay lying down, but if not, he should get up. The young man then sits up with difficulty and agrees with the man's words, tossing the meat aside. The protagonist becomes thoughtful, looking at the dark desert horizon and reflecting on the story. He realizes the old man has lived a very long time and wonders how many memories he has accumulated in his life. The boy notices that the master isn't chewing the meat, but is softening it with his own saliva. He understands that this is the right approach in a waterless desert and complains that the old man didn't tell him sooner. The boy realizes that instead of giving him a fish, the master is showing him how to learn to fish. With a funny thought, he admits that he's actually never even seen a real fish in his life. Under the starry sky, the boy asks for more meat, but the warrior immediately tells him to shut his mouth. The cold of the night arrives with force, and the young man lets out a loud sneeze. Curling up, shivering from the cold, he remembers that desert nights are freezing while the master stretches. He complains that the old man is crazy and didn't even let him sleep. because he was talking to his sword all night. The protagonist complains of thirst, but sees the old man squeezing a cloth into his mouth to drink something, grinding his teeth. The boy becomes furious upon realizing the master kept another secret for himself. He understands that the old man spread out his clothes to collect the night's dew to have something to drink. Drinking the dew, he swears revenge, but the master calls him a fool again to provoke him. The young man shouts that he's not a fool but an imbecile, and the old man agrees, asking if he can feel it. With a confused expression, the protagonist looks at the sky and asks what he is supposed to be feeling. Suddenly, he feels a strong vibration in the ground, and his entire body begins to tremble with the impact. Startled, the boy notices it's not just one or two sources, and that the danger is coming from all sides. The scene reveals that the two are completely surrounded by dozens of creatures with red eyes. The master reveals they are horned hyenas and that, although they are nocturnal, they were caught in the morning. The master then questions if the boy can survive on his own or if he needs help again. The monstrous beasts snarl furiously in advance, ready to attack in large numbers. With a confident smile, the young man points to the old man and shouts that he doesn't need any help. Surrounded by the hyenas, he guarantees he will handle everything himself and that he will survive this. His eyes glow with power, and he extends his hand to use his ability to control sand. He then unleashes a blast of sand in all directions, hitting several creatures at the same time. With a focused and determined look, the boy concentrates fully on the intense combat. Huge stakes of sand shoot up from the ground, striking several of the advancing hyenas. But the boy despairs when he sees the absurd number of monsters and curses them all for being crazy. He realizes his mana will run out before he's taken down and understands he needs a plan, fast. The protagonist concludes that brute force won't work and that he needs efficient attacks. With his hand glowing, he concentrates and tries to think of a way to fight using less mana. While he's thinking, one of the beasts sneaks up on him for a surprise attack. The young man punches the creature and yells at the monster for interrupting his train of thought during the fight. With his arm bleeding, he complains that the creature made a hole and feels a strange draft. Looking at the wound, he wonders about the sensation of a wind hole in his arm. At that moment, the pack of hyenas charges again, running towards him with great fury. He faces the approaching beasts and prepares for the worst, knowing it will be a tough fight. Seeing the monsters around him, he gets an idea and realizes he just needs to make a few holes. With a new plan, the boy launches precise and swift projectiles of sand at the enemies. He laughs insanely, realizing he doesn't need to make their heads explode, since a single hole will do the trick. The boy understands that in battle, mana is his life, and wasting it is just speeding up his own downfall. The lesson is about fighting with cost, effectiveness, using the minimum amount of mana for maximum damage. He notices that even the old man fights slowly, one by one, and lets out a laugh as he understands the technique. Meanwhile, the master scoffs at a hyena attacking him, saying that it just tickles. The warrior gets annoyed with the creature's persistence and calls the monster a filthy mutt. He decides he can't let a dog that bites people live and prepares for the end. With a wide and frightening smile on his lips, the experienced fighter gets excited for the upcoming chaos. The young man panics when he sees the old man's expression and realizes he's going to do that again. The powerful master shouts with all his might that this is going to be absolute chaos. A wave of dark red energy is released, destroying everything around with immense power. The boy is caught in the blast and screams in pain as he's thrown far away by the force of the attack. In a cold sweat, he thinks the old man is crazy and worries when he notices people are nearby. The attack leaves a gigantic crater in the desert floor, along with a pool of dark liquid. The boy wonders if the master is even human and how he did that without using any ability. He decides to be more discreet to avoid getting taken out, but he hears a bark nearby and gets startled. The warrior is sitting on the last hyena and identifies it as the alpha female of the pack. The creature roars furiously and its body is covered in an aura of crackling electric bolts. The old man recognizes a force field and is surprised to note that the beast is B, rank or higher. The alpha hyena grows in size and becomes even stronger with its electric aura, facing the master, desperate. The boy shouts for the old man to be careful with the powerful electric beast's attack, but the warrior simply extends his hand and catches the creature's power without any difficulty. The young man is left completely speechless and doesn't understand a thing that just happened in front of him. With a smile, the master comments that the electricity serves as a great shoulder massage. He then announces that the massage is over, and with a terrifying shout, says it's now her time to go. In the blink of an eye, the experienced fighter lunges forward and defeats the powerful creature with a single blow. The protagonist laughs at himself and realizes it's better for his mental health to just ignore that monster. Carrying the carcass, the old man notices the boy survived and calls him an imbecile once again. The master explains that the hyena's horn is useful and has electric properties for forging a weapon. He then tosses a dagger to the young man, who catches it in mid-air with a very confused expression. The warrior warns that from now on, he will have to hunt his own food without any more help. The man explains that the hyena's muscle is toxic, but the flank meat has no poison. Seeing the boy standing still, the old man tells him to hurry up, as the sun was about to rise. The boy shouts a "Highwest, sir," and they continue their journey through a desert with strange rock formations. With a piece of meat in his mouth, the protagonist hums happily for having secured his meal. He thinks that despite the thirst, at least he now has plenty of food to endure the long journey. With his new stepping ability, walking through the desert has become much easier and faster. The young man then teases the old man, asking if he's jealous and if he isn't getting too old. But the master doesn't appreciate the joke and tries to land a powerful punch on the boy's face. The boy manages to dodge the blow and celebrates with a shout that he managed to evade it this time. The old man complains that he got arrogant over a lousy skill and shoves his face into the sand. On all fours, the young man says it was just a joke and complains that he's dying of thirst in the desert. Suddenly, he feels a strange humidity in the air and tries to figure out where it's coming from. He realizes he didn't imagine it, as the master is also looking at the same point on the horizon. The two spot a glimmer in the distance, and the boy realizes they have finally found an oasis. The camera shows the vast expanse of the desert with its sand dunes under the scorching sun. They walk towards the oasis, with the young man using a sphere of sand to guide himself. The boy is extremely happy to confirm that the place he had only heard about in rumors actually exists. Before them, a beautiful oasis with crystal clear waters appears in the middle of nowhere, and he celebrates. The desert landscape remains vast and unforgiving, but now with a point of hope in sight. The two get closer and closer to the lake, with the boy running excitedly ahead of the master. With his eyes shining, he shouts that it's real, and that the thing he only heard about in rumors exists. The sight of the oasis is a true miracle, and the young man can barely contain his great joy. Running desperately, he shouts for water and wonders how many days it has been since they last drank. The warrior just watches the boy's excitement with an expression of disapproval and boredom. The protagonist runs with all his might, shouting, finally, towards the life-saving water. He dives headfirst into the cool water and relaxes with an expression of pure relief and happiness. Feeling the water on his body, he shouts with joy at finally being able to cool down from the heat. In that 50-degree desert, he feels the coolness enter his body after days of agony, but his happiness is cut short when his eyes widen in shock at something unexpected. At the bottom of the water, he sees a blinding, warm light, wondering what it could be. With a lost gaze, he suddenly feels an uncontrollable sleepiness take over his body. The old man then shouts for him to wake up and snap out of that strange and dangerous trance. Running desperately, the warrior rushes into the water, ready to save his young apprentice. The master pulls him out, and the boy falls to all fours at the edge of the oasis, spitting out all the water. At that moment, a giant and terrifying sea monster emerges from the lake, revealing the trap. The man then grabs the protagonist by his clothes, pulling him away from the imminent danger. The colossal creature attacks and flings the warrior far away with an extremely powerful impact. The boy is dragged along with the master while screaming in despair from the surprise attack. With an agile leap, the powerful fighter dodges the monster's mouth, taking the boy with him. He firmly grips the hilt of his sword, preparing for combat against the beast. In a swift move, the master cuts the creature in half with a precise and devastating blow. Drenched, the young man is amazed and realizes that this was the mirage he had heard so much about. With a rainbow in the sky, the Oasis disappears, and the defeated monster reveals the true nature of the place. The old man explains that it's a sand mole, which lures prey with its light and then devours them. With a serious expression, the experienced warrior faces his apprentice with great disapproval. Without warning, he lands a strong punch to the boy's stomach, who falls to the ground, confused. The master yells at him for forgetting everything he learned and getting cocky just because he adapted. He warns that fools like the young man are the first to perish in that merciless desert. After the scolding, the boy just agrees, and the powerful warrior sighs in relief at his response. The man then orders him to skin the monster, and the boy is confused by the sudden command. The old man explains that the beast's belly is soft and perfect for making cloaks, and he should cut it. The protagonist innocently asks if the old man needs a cloak, and he sighs wearily. Furious, the warrior shouts for him to make his own and questions why his intelligence has dropped. With an awkward smile, the young man apologizes as blood trickles from his ears. The master explains that the monster looks a lot like the fish that used to live on Earth. He says the boy has never seen a fish and tells him to take a good look at the defeated creature. With a dirty face, the boy is fascinated and admits it's the first time he's ever seen a fish. He concludes that fish are terrifying and prepares to cut the carcass with his dagger. The old man scoffs and offers to help, but the young man shouts that he'll do it all by himself. He tries to cut the monster's skin, but realizes it's much tougher than he had imagined. The boy then concentrates and decides to use his mana to strengthen the dagger's small blade. With mana flowing, the weapon glows, and he manages to increase its cutting power for the task. Carefully, he cuts a thin fin and turns it into a makeshift needle for sewing. Next, he uses the tendons from the monster's flesh as thread to join the pieces together. A spark of inspiration appears in his eyes, and he gets excited about his great idea, but the result is a disaster, and the master, lying down, accuses him of turning the fish into garbage. The boy doesn't give up and says he has plenty of material to try again more carefully. Night falls in the desert, and the sky fills with stars as time passes slowly. With a shout of victory, the protagonist finally finishes his cloak and celebrates his success. After 8 failures, he shows the cloak to the master and jokes that the piece is good enough to sell. The old man calls him an imbecile, and the boy gets startled, thinking the warrior wants to steal his cloak. But the master tells him to stop talking nonsense and throws a disgusting organ for the boy to eat. The warrior explains that the monster's gallbladder is a precious remedy, and he must eat all of it. With a scary smile, the man warns that if the boy doesn't eat it, he will meet his end right there. He hurries the young man, and the boy wishes for the old man's arm to fall off from holding the organ. In a cold sweat, the protagonist decides to obey, knowing he doesn't have much of a choice in the situation. He eats the gallbladder and complains about the bitter taste, but prefers it to being beaten into the ground. Holding the disgusting organ, he wonders what it is, as he doesn't feel satisfied from the food. He feels like he's eating a cloud, and even after eating a lot, he doesn't feel full. Thinking he ate too fast, the boy is interrupted by the master, who calls him an imbecile again, sitting by the fire. The old man says that now it's time for the young man to really burn from the inside out. The boy doesn't understand anything, but his chest begins to glow with a strange reddish energy. With veins popping, he starts to scream in pain, feeling an unbearable heat from within. He screams that his body is burning and that the sensation is much worse than just flames. His body and his mana collapse, and he feels as if the sun is in his stomach. Seeing the suffering, the warrior just tells him to hang in there and calls him an imbecile again. The master explains that the Osis will disappear into the quicksand, as if it had never existed. But even so, the sand monster is reborn from its eggs and returns to continue the cycle. The old man says this is the cycle of life, and the boy screams, cursing the man for his coldness. In agony, the young man tells the master to stop being sentimental and begs him to save him already. The warrior just turns his face away and completely ignores his apprentice's pleas for help. Screaming in pain, the boy swears he will get his revenge, while the old man tells him to shut up and go to sleep. After passing out, the protagonist wakes up on the sand, not quite understanding where he is. The master appears upside down and sarcastically asks if the imbecile has finally woken up. The boy is startled and yells at the old man for scaring him so suddenly. The old man asks if he slept well, but the boy corrects him, saying he actually passed out. The man asks how his body is feeling, and the young man starts to check, feeling normal at first. But he soon realizes his body is incredibly light, as if it were a grain of sand. His muscles have become as hard as steel, and his mana now flows like a true tempest. He is shocked to have become so strong so suddenly and wonders what exactly happened. The master explains that it was all thanks to the monster's gallbladder he ate before passing out. He says the organ has the power to resist the sun and sand and is as valuable as a mana stone. The boy panics upon learning he ate something so precious and questions if he was really allowed to do that. The warrior says he only gave him the item because he was weak and needed to be at least minimally useful on the journey. The young man promises to be useful, but the old man tells him to eat and warns they won't leave until the monster is finished. The days pass under the scorching desert sun as the two recover and eat. Looking at the carcass, the master is surprised by how much meat lasted for 4 days. He then calls the boy to set off again and continue their long journey through the desert. With a confident smile on his face, the protagonist seems ready for whatever comes next. With a big smile, the boy puts on the cloak, happy as can be, showing the result to the master. Just then, a strong sandstorm begins to blow violently across the entire desert. The young man feels the strong wind hitting his body, but his new cloak protects him very well. Chewing on a piece of meat, he notices that the storm feels like just a gentle breeze. Meanwhile, the master continues to walk calmly through the windstorm without even stopping. The boy finds it strange that the old man hasn't said a single word in the last few days of travel. He complains that they've been walking nonstop for 2 weeks and doubts if the warrior even knows the way. Suddenly, a giant and terrifying insect emerges from the sand, letting out a very shrill cry. But the young man dodges the monster with great ease, telling the creature to shut its mouth. Sighing tiredly, the protagonist dodges another attack, finding all of this very boring. At that moment, he looks to the side and notices something strange that suddenly catches his attention. The monstrous insect remains firm on the ground, preparing to attack the boy once more. The apprentice backs away a bit, understanding that these beasts won't let them pass peacefully. Through his perception, the young man notices that he is completely surrounded by several of these insects. With a determined look, he prepares for the fight, manipulating the sand around his body. The boy charges forward with all his might, knowing that if he's too slow, the old man might end his life. He glides across the sand, dodging the swift attacks as the insects try to catch him. Gathering sand in his hands, the young man prepares to fight back, hearing a compliment from his master. A gigantic explosion of sand erupts from the ground, destroying several creatures at once. He walks through the battlefield, proud, and comments on how easy it is for him to fight on the sand. However, the young man panics when he notices that the master has left him behind and is already far away. A beast tries to attack him from behind while he curses the old man for being a heartless coward. Running desperately across the sand, he hopes the old man didn't hear his insults. Suddenly, The protagonist is startled, feeling something enter his sensory perception range. He keeps running, always on high alert to react to any monster that approaches. However, the young man realizes that the presence he just felt is very different from the others. The monstrous aura fills the area, revealing a colossal creature of pure terror. A frightening army of giant insects leaps over the dunes, heading towards the boy. The boy frantically dodges, becoming desperate at the absurd number of enemies. He looks back, terrified, and shouts for his master, asking for help in the face of that army. But the experienced warrior is just sitting back, relaxing, and watching everything calmly from a distance. The young man fights back the attacks and decides not to act like a child, vowing to handle it all himself. Launching sand stakes, he understands that the master noticed the monsters and did this on purpose. With a maniacal smile, the protagonist charges forward without fear, saying it doesn't matter how many there are. The boy unleashes a devastating power, creating immense slashes of sand that destroy the insects. But during the intense combat, one of the monsters manages to hit the boy's face with great force. The beast grabs him violently, preventing the young man from escaping the surprise attack. Immediately, several insects jump on top of him, and the boy regrets being so arrogant. Pinned to the ground, he tries to resist, calling the creatures cowards for ganging up on him. Even more monsters continue to join the attack, burying the poor apprentice completely in the sand. A colossal wave of sand explodes and throws the boy far away with absurd force. The ground around him begins to crack as a terrifying pressure takes over the area. Suddenly, a gigantic leg breaks through the sand, revealing the true size of the threat in the desert. The boy looks on in shock at the hole and realizes he is standing on a gigantic anthill. Desperate, he concludes that he needs to escape upwards as quickly as possible and assess the situation. With a swift leap, the young man tries to escape the danger, sensing that these insects don't fight in the air. A colossal ant emerges from the crater, and the boy is terrified by the size of the creature. Overcome with fear, he can't believe that those disgusting creatures can do something like that. Just then, the giant monster makes a brutal leap, trying to devour the poor boy in mid-air. The boy is hit head-on and falls, hitting his back violently on the desert dunes. Spitting blood, he screams in pain, feeling the strong impact of that devastating attack. Lying on the sand, the young man struggles to catch his breath as blood runs down his injured face. With his eyes full of tears, he struggles to get up as he feels the gravity of the situation. In the distance, the experienced warrior continues to sit with his arms crossed, watching everything calmly. Even injured, the boy flashes an insane and purely menacing smile at the cruel monsters. He stares down the giant ant right in front of him and tells all the insects to pay close attention. The boy jumps back, dodging the blow, and warns that he's about to show them what true survival looks like. The master just watches the boy, agreeing that using his ability on the sand was a blessing. The old man acknowledges that the young man could live comfortably, but that would be his ultimate limit. He thinks that people don't understand the desert and end up deceiving themselves with false hopes. The warrior reflects on how society just standardizes people as if they were machines. Looking at the sand whirlpools, the old man remembers past tragedies that he will never forget. He laments the way the world was destroyed a long time ago because of very weak people. A dark memory from 100 years ago emerges, showing an entire city being annihilated. The master remembers how powerless everyone was and how many lives were lost right in front of him. He watched colleagues and even family members suffer in that inferno of fire and destruction, unable to help. The old man regrets having lost everything like a true failure, unable to protect anyone. But focusing on the present, the warrior praises the boy for not backing down in the face of danger. With a small smile, the old man says the boy must soon overcome the barrier between life and the end. He knows that if the young man keeps risking his life, he will become incredibly stronger. Just then, the boy creates an immense whirlwind of sand that sucks in all the surrounding monsters. With an insane look on his face, the protagonist screams that all those cursed insects are done for now. The enormous ants are mercilessly sucked in by the force of the young warrior's crushing attack. He gathers the sand, forming a colossal, compressed missile that spins with absurd pressure. The heavy blow advances violently through the air, promising to destroy everything in its path. The attack crashes down, crushing the monsters with the combined force of gravity and sand magic. The brutal collision creates an absurd gust of wind, and the boy celebrates how much his power has grown. Consumed by fury, the boy shouts that he will annihilate all the enemies, right there without hesitation. He celebrates that the insects couldn't finish him before he became powerful enough. Watching the boy's success, the old man gives a proud smile, finding the scene very exciting. The panting boy looks up, noticing enormous sand tornadoes forming in the dark sky. The force of the winds then creates gigantic and very deep craters all over the desert. With a bruised face, the young man clenches his fists and gives a completely insane smile from the adrenaline. He shouts for the old man to watch closely as he promises to eliminate all those monsters at once. But the boy freezes completely upon noticing a terrifying shadow appearing right behind him. An immense ant attacks him by surprise, and the boy is in shock for not having sensed its presence. Bleeding heavily, he realizes it wasn't a stealth ability and deduces they used poison. Falling to his knees, the apprentice understands that the toxin has completely blocked his mana points. Enraged, he curses the creatures, feeling humiliated for being defeated in such a low way. Suddenly, the insect's huge legs begin to deliver several swift blows against the young man. The protagonist's eyes lose their light, and he just lets out a curse before losing consciousness. Waking up dazed, the boy realizes he has been taken deep into the anthill. Lying on the dirty ground, he hears strange noises and notices he is surrounded by giant larvae. The disgusting creatures start to shriek and crawl fiercely towards the injured young man's body. With no strength to react, he just watches as one of the larvae bites his arm, which is lying on the stone floor. The little monster sinks its fangs into the boy's skin, further injuring his already aching body. Desperate, he realizes he can't move and fears being devoured alive by those things. With his vision blurred by blood, the poor boy wonders what he should do to survive. He feels his end is near and thinks his whole life is flashing before his eyes. The larvae continue to advance, making bizarre sounds, ready to devour their prey completely. But in an act of pure fury, the boy smashes one of the monsters with a brutal punch against the ground. The larger insects are greatly startled and retreat a bit, impressed by the force of the blow. Gathering his last strength, the protagonist pushes himself up from the dark floor and slowly begins to rise. With a furious look, he shouts that it's unfair to go out like this, because he hasn't had any good memories. The young man curses the ants with hatred as a mysterious light begins to glow on his forearm. Just then, a colossal explosion of dark magic erupts, destroying the monster's nest. The shock wave is so overwhelming that it sends the gigantic beasts flying without any mercy. The insects are completely annihilated by the brute force of the boy's surprising attack. Large boulders and debris from the cave ceiling collapse as the energy sweeps through the entire place. Immense sand spikes sprout from the ground and pierce the entire nest, proving the apprentice's power. The boy realizes the toxin is gone, his mana is overflowing. Noticing that his rank has leveled up, looking at the luminous marks on his arm, he deduces that his strength has now evolved drastically. The young man admires his own hand and understands that his magical power can no longer be compared to an F rank. But with his eyes glowing in pure focus, he realizes the real battle is not over yet. Behind him, a colossal and terrifying insect appears without a single scratch after the magic explosion. The giant monster attacks with fury, and the boy is forced to make a swift leap to avoid being crushed. The beast shatters the ground with ease, and the boy is impressed by the creature's brutal strength. The hideous creature raises its body, covered in a hard carapace, and prepares to attack again. Falling to the ground, the protagonist despairs upon noticing that his attack didn't even leave a scratch on it. Placing his hand on the ground, The heavily sweating young man understands he has no chance of winning like this. The boy understands that his attacks won't even leave a scratch on the beast. At that, he decides to think of a way to break through the giant monster's impenetrable armor. The young man focuses on finding a way to rip off that thick carapace without needing to break or pierce it. In a swift move, the boy charges forward with all his might and grabs the insect's leg with great strength and courage. He decides that since he can't break the defense, he'll try to rip it all off just by twisting it with force. The giant creature lets out a shrill roar of pain as the boy continues to twist its leg. But suddenly, a blinding and mysterious glow begins to emerge directly from the terrifying beast's body. The glow becomes increasingly intense, and the apprentice has to cover his eyes to protect himself from the light. Next, the boy feels immense pain as a very high-pitched sound begins to hurt his ears. He realizes the high-frequency waves are so strong that he feels like his brain is about to explode. The monster continues to emit the devastating sound attack across the entire dark battlefield. Even bleeding, the young man holds on tight and curses the creature for hiding such a dirty trick. With his eyes glowing in pure fury, he accepts the challenge and decides to go all out against the insect. Gathering all his strength, the boy swears he will only stop when one of them loses their life there. He squeezes the carapace with even more intensity, determined to win this deadly contest no matter what. Filled with rage, the protagonist warns that this brutal fight will last until the very end. At that moment, the experienced warrior appears silently and places a hand on his apprentice's shoulder. The boy suddenly loses his strength, falling backward with his face covered in blood, not understanding anything. He feels he has reached his physical and magical limit as his body collapses towards the ground. Falling in defeat, the young man curses his own body, complaining about being so weak and pathetic in this fight. The master catches him before he falls and agrees with the boy's words, saying he is indeed weak. Holding the boy, the old man calls him a fool and warns that he'll end up losing his life if he falls asleep there. Even though he's all beaten up, the boy gives a weak and relieved smile upon seeing his master came to save him. With a big smile, the old man calls the boy a brat and admits that he wasn't completely useless. He explains that the beast was much stronger and praises the boy for fighting bravely until the end. But the young man mumbles that he can't hear a single word because his eardrums were destroyed. At this, the warrior laughs at the situation and lifts the boy up by his clothes without any pity for his condition. Being dragged across the ground, the apprentice asks where the old man is taking him in such a rough manner. The master walks through the cave debris, leading the boy to a small, glowing orb on the ground. The boy's eyes widen in surprise as he asks what that luminous sphere is, lying among the rocks. He points to the strange, glowing object and tries to question the warrior about its use. The man then writes on a rock, explaining that it's a queen's egg with a strawberry flavor to heal him. Reading the words, the protagonist is incredulous and wonders if the old man really wants him to eat that. With a disgusted expression, the young man stares at the luminous sphere, doubting if it's even edible. The apprentice questions the master, wanting to be sure he won't get sick again like last time. The old man just laughs silently, while the boy complains that he still can't hear what he's saying. Sighing in defeat, the boy decides to try the sphere, thinking a single bite wouldn't be the end of him. He brings his face closer and takes a bite of the glowing delicacy, commenting that he's never tasted strawberry in his life. Suddenly, the boy's eyes widen with joy as he realizes the egg's flavor is incredibly good. Utterly amazed by the food, he wonders if there might be another one of those for him to devour. The shocked young man, with his chest pierced by spikes, calls out for his master, not understanding a thing. A terrible pain takes over the boy, feeling as if all his organs are twisting. He remembers that the queen's egg is extremely toxic and dangerous for any ordinary person. Eating it causes spikes to tear through the body from the inside out, causing immense pain. Screaming in pure agony, the apprentice questions what the crazy old man just gave him to eat. The warrior cleans his ear and tells the boy to get used to the pain if he wants to survive there. With a swollen and pale face, the protagonist suffers, thinking it's impossible to get used to that. Coughing violently, the young man spits out a dark liquid as his body goes into total collapse. Looking at his own dirty hand, he realizes the gravity of the situation and fears for his own end. He remembers the good times with the old man, believing he could finally trust someone. But with his face in the sand, the poor boy feels like a complete idiot for having believed the old man. Completely drained of strength, the boy collapses to the ground as the experienced warrior turns his back. At that, the master grabs the carcass of a giant insect and prepares to continue his work. With a swift and brutal blow, the man smashes the beast with ease, using only his physical strength. He shoves his hand into the destroyed creature, looking for something valuable amidst all the mess. Pulling his arm back, the old man manages to yank out a valuable, glowing stone from inside the monster. With a big smile, he admires the magic stone, celebrating that he hit the jackpot with the loot. The warrior realizes that this hunt yielded good items and decides to save everything for later use. At that moment, the experienced fighter feels something strange and looks over his shoulder, very surprised. With a very serious expression, the old man stares into the void and mutters something about an old companion. He knows that the fate of the weak is just the cruel reality of this world and laments the young man's loss. Accepting the apprentice's demise, the old man decides to leave, walking away and leaving the boy behind. Entering the dark cave, the master talks to himself, stating that they don't have much time left. However, the pool of dark liquid on the ground begins to move, and the protagonist questions if he's alive. The old man reappears with a smile on his face, teasing the boy and calling him an imbecile again. Suddenly, a gigantic explosion of sand erupts on the scene, showcasing the young apprentice's power. Shielding his face from the dust, the warrior complains about the boy's rebellious attitude, causing all this chaos. With an intrigued look, the old man realizes that his student managed to overcome that deadly challenge. The boy gets up furiously and uses his mana to form dozens of spinning sand lances. Seeing the attacks, the warrior tells the young man to stop the unnecessary show and focus. Not listening, the protagonist launches all the sand stakes with fury, wanting many answers. The impact causes great destruction as the boy shouts, asking why the old man tried to take him out. The dust begins to settle, and the boy continues to shout, completely outraged by that betrayal. With his eyes glowing in pure rage, he extends his hand and vows that he will not forgive his master. Enormous and dangerous rock stakes begin to fall from the ceiling, threatening to crush everything around. The giant boulders crash down violently, breaking the cave floor into several pieces. The force of the collapse generates a strong wind that pushes the young man back with full force. Panning in the middle of the smoke, he faces the destruction, maintaining his defensive combat stance. He tries to question him again, but is confused when he hears the master's calm voice amidst the dust. The old man emerges unscathed, holding his sword, and calls the boy an idiot for not thinking the situation through. The boy is astonished to see that the man took all the attacks without a single scratch. Sighing, the old man calls the boy an idiot, explaining that a simple flick would have been enough to finish him. He asks why he would give him poison just to end him, and the young man agrees with the old man's logic. The master explains that the egg attacks the organs, but also removes all toxins from the body at once. With that, it fills the empty space with pure mana and questions if the boy didn't feel the power flowing. Surprised, the protagonist stares at his own glowing hand, noticing his energy has greatly increased. Emotional, the young man looks at the old man and calls him old man. With an expression of regret, crying with guilt, he hugs the warrior, apologizing for having doubted his mentor's intentions. The master tells him to get off him in disgust, and the boy agrees, saying that even his hearing has returned to normal. With a gentle smile, the warrior tells the grown man to stop crying and let go of him that instant. The old man slings his greatsword onto his back and says he understands his young apprentice's feelings. The boy wipes his face and thinks he came very close to kicking the bucket, believing he was forgiven. The warrior says he made a risky bet and tells the boy to get ready for them to continue their journey. The old man carries the apprentice under his arm and declares that he will not forgive his attitude at all. Being carried like a sack of potatoes, the boy gets tense and asks why he was grabbed like that. The powerful master just gives a sadistic and very scary smile, ignoring the young man's questions. He explains that since they don't have much time, they needed to get out of that nest as quickly as possible. The boy freezes on the spot and mutters a curse, dreading what is about to happen to him. On the desert surface, two scorpions are devouring remains when the ground begins to tremble violently. A huge pillar of sand explodes from the ground, launching large blocks of rock in all directions. The old man leaps from the crater carrying the young man and lets out a loud laugh while the boy screams in despair. With a crazy smile, the master questions who told the boy to sleep for 4 whole days in the desert. The warrior continues to insult the boy until they both notice something very impressive right below them. Looking down, the apprentice is shocked and comments that nothing in this place surprises him anymore. But the young man's expression changes completely, reflecting pure panic as he stares at the enormous creature there. Falling from the sky, his jaw drops, and he screams upon seeing an absurdly gigantic stone monster. The boy notices the magical beast's unreal size, noting that they are almost 30 kilometers away. The two land on the sands, and the experienced fighter explains that it is the mobile fortress called Archelon. The old man says it's a B-rank turtle-type beast, but it has a defense superior to A rank. The protagonist screams in amazement upon learning they tamed such an insane monster just for transport. The young man comes to terms with the fact that the world is vast and hides dangers and powers beyond his imagination. Watching the beast move away, the boy deduces that there are people strong enough to control something like that. The enormous turtle walks through the desert, showing its imposing presence with its glowing eyes in the sand. At that moment, the warrior jumps onto a high rock, preparing for his next move. He strikes the ground with great force, creating a large beam of light that kicks up dust and startles the young man. The old man says he wasn't sure from the distance and tells the confused boy to stay put. A mysterious voice suddenly emerges, saying that it's been a long time since their last encounter. The scene reveals a bearded old man with a monocle appearing in the middle of the sandstorm, calling out for Deodin. The master greets an old friend in a playful, mocking way and makes a joke about how many teeth he's missing. The other old man is shocked to see the warrior looking so healthy, despite being over 100 years old. He then asks what the man is doing there, and the master replies that he was running away from some monsters. The young apprentice mutters that running from scavengers is pathetic, but quickly corrects himself, saying it was actually wise. The boy is confused and wonders why these old guys are so ridiculously strong. The man with the monocle ignores the conversation and looks at the massive stone turtle behind him. The three of them face each other in the middle of the desert, surrounded by a massive cloud of sand and dust. Suddenly, the protagonist looks up with a sparkle in his eyes, completely amazed by the sight. The warrior points to the stairs and warns them that they need to climb up onto the gigantic stone beast. The apprentice shrinks back a little in fear as the desert wind blows hard all around him. A giant eye stares at the boy, who decides to stay very quiet so he doesn't draw any attention to himself. The master's friend notices the youth and asks, suspiciously, if he's a new subordinate. With a smile, the old man lifts the boy by his collar and says he picked up some trash to help the environment. The other old man laughs, finding it funny that the warrior is dragging someone around with him. With a serious expression, he adjusts his monocle and comments that the world must be coming to an end. The protagonist's jaw drops as he enters the fortress. Unable to believe what he's seeing, he comes across a huge city built on the back of the monster and asks what kind of place it is. The master explains that this is the Moat clan, and the boy asks if everyone there is related. He confirms they are all descendants of the Wizard of Ruin, but adds that they are just a bunch of useless people. A white-haired man gets annoyed and asks what the warrior actually knows about their clan. The old man mocks him, saying he knows enough to say they'll all be abandoned once he passes away. The white-haired man stays silent for a moment, and then says they will talk about this later. In a new location, the white-haired man stomps his foot hard on the ground, showing his extreme frustration. Sitting at a table, he suggests they should look at the goods the warrior brought with him. At that, the master creates a dark portal with his hand, preparing to show his items. Suddenly, a massive pile of treasures and rare equipment appears in the middle of the luxurious room. The boy is shocked by the amount of stuff and asks how many lives the old man took to get all of it. The curious apprentice asks if his master is a wizard and where he got all those things from. The old man complains that the boy doesn't even know what a subspace is and regrets bringing an idiot along. The youth shouts, wanting an explanation, and the master gets irritated by the boy talking back like that. The man with the monocle examines one of the items and praises the flawless quality of every piece in the collection. Losing his patience, the warrior tells him to stop flattering him and asks how much he'll get for everything. He jokes about paying with mana stones, but the warrior doesn't find the joke funny at all. Knowing the man doesn't care about mana stones, he asks what the old man wants in exchange for the items. Drinking something hot, the master replies that he wants a chest plate made from the shell of an ant queen. He holds his mug firmly and continues his list of important requests for the trade. The warrior also asks for a subspace item, leaving the young apprentice even more confused by everything. The other old man laughs and asks why he wants a chest plate and a subspace item if he already has the best. The master replies that it's not for him and grabs his apprentice's collar with a determined look. He reveals that the equipment is for the idiot next to him, who nearly chokes on his drink. Surprised by the request, the master's friend widens his eyes and stares at the warrior with curiosity. He thinks to himself that for his friend to care about someone, the boy must be very useful for something. With that, the old man shouts loudly across the room, calling for a girl named Kaylee to come over. Right after, the large metal door opens, revealing that someone was arriving at the scene. The master places a hand on the apprentice's shoulder, while the two of them wait for the person to approach. The boy blushes and is surprised by what he sees in front of him, unable to hide his reaction. A woman in short clothes appears and calmly asks if someone had called for her. The apprentice thinks the girl is very beautiful, and she asks if her grandfather needed any help. The old man asks the young woman if she still has the subspace bracelet she created a while back. She replies that she doesn't have the bracelet anymore, but she has a gauntlet that turned out so well she kept it. The grandfather then orders her to give the gauntlet to the boy, and she is shocked by the request. The master is surprised to learn that the little girl became an enchanter, and she greets him. He comments that it's a rare profession and praises the grandfather for leaving something useful for his granddaughter. The old man pushes the girl forward and tells her to get on with what he asked without complaining too much. With that, he dismisses her and tells her to let someone named No to make a new chest plate. The young woman agrees and tells the boy to follow her, while he goes along happily to get his new item. The two old warriors sit in silence, watching the younger ones walk away. Walking through the city streets, the pair heads toward the workshop to pick up the equipment. The boy then asks the girl what her relationship is with that monster of a master he has. He explains that he met the old man by chance and has been dragged everywhere ever since. The girl panics and grabs him, shouting that it's impossible for him to have met that man and still be alive. The apprentice notices trauma in the girl's eyes and realizes she is deeply afraid of that man. He remembers the master with glowing red eyes and understands her terror at seeing the old man fight. The young woman notices his expression and figures the boy also has posed traumatic stress because of the old man. She warns him to be careful because the master is a monster in human skin, and he agrees with her. They arrive in front of a large metal door, and the girl prepares to show her work. With a wild smile, she confirms that this place is her workshop and gets very excited. She tells the boy not to be scared, as he has never seen anything like this in his entire life. The protagonist enters the room and stands there with his mouth open, completely shocked by what he's seeing. He sees hundreds of incredible items, and she brags, saying she made all of them by herself. The girl shows off her masterpiece with self-repair in a subspace made of very rare materials. The youth smiles excitedly upon hearing about the self-repair function and is amazed by the new item. She explains that the gauntlet has a fire attribute and can become a monstrous weapon with the right item. The apprentice asks if he can really keep something so valuable, and she confirms it was an order. However, she warns him that he can only store something once, and after that, it can't be taken out again. He says thank you and reaches out to take the gauntlet, but she holds onto the item with a lot of strength. At the last second, the girl hesitates and pulls the equipment back, refusing to hand it over to him. The two of them start a tug of war over the gauntlet, and the boy shouts as he's pulled across the workshop. She refuses to give her creation to just anyone, and he screams, asking what she wants. With a shout of victory, the boy snatches the gauntlet and cheers that her child is now his. Suddenly, a violent tremor shakes the entire workshop, and the two of them look at the ceiling, terrified. Confused, the boy asks if he should return the gauntlet, but the girl screams desperately, saying no. With pure terror in her eyes, the girl warns that the roar of the massive turtle means they have arrived. At that, the apprentice cowers from the noise and asks the girl who those people could be. Breaking into a cold sweat, the girl just looks up, overcome by a deep fear of the approaching threat. In another room, the master relaxes on the sofa while his old friend stares at the ceiling, paying close attention. With a serious expression, the man with the monocle grumbles about how persistent those guys are. In the middle of the sandstorm, the scavengers ride at full speed, chasing the clan closely. The old white-haired warrior smiles broadly and recognizes his old acquaintance from the desert. With that, the man with the monocle complains that the other remains too strong, even after passing 100 years of age. Then he asks what his rival is doing there, since that sandy territory doesn't belong to his group. But the brute mocks his friend, saying that running from mere looters is simply a lack of courage. The boy then becomes thoughtful, wondering how those two old men managed to be so powerful. Impatient, the elderly man with the monocle decides to ignore the conversation and gives a loud whistle to call something. Suddenly, a gigantic creature emerges from the sand, making everyone there look like tiny ants. With that, the boy looks up, completely terrified, unable to believe the size of the monster. At that moment, the mentor announces that it is time to leave and begins walking towards the enormous beast. As they climb, the apprentice trembles with fear and tries to shrink back so as not to attract the beast's attention. Upon encountering the monster's giant eye, the young man decides to remain very quiet to avoid trouble. At that moment, the clan leader notices the newcomer and asks the warrior if the boy is his new servant, holding the boy by the hood. The master jokes that he only picked up some trash from the middle of the road. The old man with the monocle laughs and comments that he never imagined seeing his friend traveling with company. Looking closely, he jokingly says that the end of the world must really be coming. But the young man is speechless when he enters the place and sees something totally unbelievable. He comes across an entire city built on the monster's back and asks what place this is. The experienced warrior explains that this is the Mort clan, and the boy asks if they are all related. The tutor confirms the kinship but mocks them, saying that everyone there is useless without the creature's help. Annoyed by the comment, a long-haired man says that he knows nothing about the family. Then the master shouts back, saying that they are parasites and will be abandoned when the leader dies. At that point, the clan leader prefers to end the matter and suggests leaving that serious conversation for later. In the new room, the old man will stomp his feet, demonstrating all his frustration with the visit. Seated at the table, he suggests they take a look at the goods the warrior brought with him. With this, the master creates a dark portal with his hand, preparing to reveal his valuable items. Suddenly, a huge pile of treasures and rare equipment appears in the middle of the luxurious room. The boy is startled by the gold and wonders how many lives were taken to obtain it. Curious, the apprentice asks if his mentor is a magician and where he got all those things from. The old man complains that the boy doesn't even know what a subspace is and regrets having brought an idiot along. The young man shouts, demanding an explanation, and the master becomes irritated by the boy's response. The man with the monocle examines one of the items and praises the impeccable quality of each piece in the collection. Losing his patience, the warrior tells him to stop flattering him and asks how much he will be paid for everything. The man jokes about paying with mana stones, but the master draws his sword and shows that he doesn't like it. Knowing that his friend doesn't care about mana stones, he asks what the old man wants in exchange for the items. Sipping something hot, the master replies that he desires a breastplate made from the shell of a queen ant. He holds the mug firmly and continues listing his important requests for the exchange. The warrior also asks for a subspace item, leaving the young apprentice even more confused by everything. The other elderly man finds it funny and asks why he wants a chest harness and such an item when he already has the best ones. The master replies that it's not for him and grabs his apprentice by the collar with a determined look. He reveals that the equipment is for the idiot next to him, who almost choked on his drink. Surprised by the request, the master's friend's eyes widen, and he stares at the warrior with curiosity. He thinks to himself that for his partner to care about someone, the boy must be very useful. With that, the old man shouts loudly, calling for a girl named Kaylee to come over. Immediately afterwards, the large metal door began to open, revealing that someone was arriving. The master places his hand on the apprentice's shoulder, while the two wait for the person to approach. The boy blushes and is very surprised by what he sees ahead, unable to hide his reaction. At that moment, a young woman dressed in short clothes enters the place and calmly asks if they called for her. The apprentice finds the girl very beautiful, and she asks if her grandfather needs any help. The old man asks his granddaughter if she still has that subspace bracelet she created a long time ago, but she says she no longer has the bracelet, but rather a gauntlet that turned out so well that she kept it. With that, the girl shouts indignantly, saying that the special equipment is too valuable for the boy. At that point, the master mocks her, commenting that the little girl has truly become an expert in spells. The old man smiles, saying that these professionals are very rare, and praises his rival for his talented granddaughter. At that moment, the man with the monocle pushes his granddaughter forward, ordering her to hand over the item immediately. He tells her to hurry and asks them to inform a craftsman to begin making a new suit of armor. So the young woman agrees and calls the apprentice to follow her, while he happily accepts the invitation. The two older warriors simply watched in silence as the young men left through the door of the room. As they walk through the city streets, the new couple heads towards her workplace. Then the young man asks the girl what her relationship is with that truly monstrous master. He explains that he met the old man by chance and has been dragged around the block ever since. Hearing this, she panics and grabs him, screaming that it's impossible to be alive after encountering the old man. At that moment, the boy notices the trauma in her eyes and realizes that she is terrified of that man. He remembers the master fighting with glowing red eyes and perfectly understands her terror. Then the young woman warns him to be very careful, because the old man is actually a monster in sheep's clothing. With that, they arrive in front of a large metal gate, and she prepares to open her studio. Then she gives a very cheerful smile and assures him that special place is her own workshop. The girl tells the boy not to be scared, because he has never seen anything like it in his entire life. But upon entering the room, the apprentice is paralyzed with surprise at what he sees before him. The boy is amazed by the number of weapons, and she boasts that she did it all by herself. She proudly displays the subspace gauntlet, which has an incredible self-repair function. The young man grinned from ear to ear upon learning of this self-repair capability and was amazed. She then explains that the weapon has a fire attribute and can transform into something monstrous. The young man wonders if he can really keep such an expensive gift, and she says it was an order from her grandfather. However, she warns that it's only possible to store things there once, and then you can never retrieve them again. With that, the boy reaches out to grab the item, but the girl grips the gauntlet very tightly. At the last second, the young woman hesitates to hand over her artwork, and the two begin to fight over the object. They start a real tug of war in the middle of the studio while yelling at each other. She refuses to give the precious item to a stranger, and the boy complains, angrily pulling it away. With a cry of victory, the apprentice manages to take the gauntlet from her and celebrates that the object is now his. Suddenly, a very strong tremor shakes the entire world, and the two look up at the ceiling in fright. Confused, the boy asks if he should return the gift, but the girl screams desperately, saying no. Overcome with panic, she warns that the giant turtle's roar means the enemies have arrived. Startled by the noise, the boy runs away desperately and asks her who those people are. Sweating profusely, the young woman simply stares upwards, paralyzed by panic at the approaching threat. In another room, the master rests peacefully on the sofa while his old companion watches the ceiling. With a serious expression, the old man with the monocle grumbles about how persistent those guys are. In the midst of the sandstorm, the raiders run at high speed to reach the group. Meanwhile, the young people run down the stairs, and the boy asks if they really are the looters. The girl confirms the suspicion and says that they are part of a dangerous faction that is growing. She reveals that the gang is led by a low-level, awakened, insane captain who is very dangerous, running non-stop. She warns that they are crazy and eliminate people without a second thought. Upon reaching a huge golden door, the boy is astonished that a weak warrior could inspire so much fear. At that moment, the young girl bursts into the main room, screaming for her grandfather and calling for help. She warns about the approaching enemies, and the old man calmly says that he has also noticed the group. The girl asks if they should move the giant monster, but the elder warns that the gang would catch up with them. Cracking his fists with determination, the leader says that now is the exact moment to counterattack. With that, she says she will gather the warriors immediately, but the master interrupts her, saying no. The strong, white-haired warrior stands firmly on the ground and declares that the two of them will solve the problem. The young woman is completely bewildered, while the powerful older man calmly takes a sip of his drink. Suddenly, the master shouts, calling the apprentice and ordering the boy to prepare for the fight. At this point, the young man points to himself, completely bewildered, as to why he must fight in his mentor's place. The old man shouts that he has already taken the treasure and now needs to pay by confronting the enemy. The boy is left speechless and asks how he will defeat a high-level awakened warrior. Looking coldly at the experienced fighter, he simply asks if the apprentice is afraid of combat. This question leaves the boy completely shocked and speechless in the face of the master's coldness. At that moment, the young man was already outside, facing the fierce sandstorm in the desert. Pulling up his hood, the boy angrily complains about being thrown into the middle of that dangerous mess. He realizes he fell for a cheap trick and gets angry at the cunning of that lying old man. Trying to stay calm, the boy takes a deep breath, knowing he doesn't have time to complain. At that moment, The boy closes his eyes briefly to fully concentrate before the battle. Knowing that the enemies will arrive in a few minutes, he tries to devise a quick attack plan. Looking at his hands, the young man focuses his attention on the mysterious power of the gauntlet he has just acquired. At this moment, the apprentice adjusts the equipment, trying to find a way to overcome an alarm clock. With eyes gleaming with determination, he decides to face whoever is stronger than him. From atop the turtle, the man with the monocle asks if it's really a good idea to leave the boy alone, but the master responds coldly, reminding the boy that he needs to learn to survive on his own. He states with absolute conviction that if the boy loses the fight, he will simply die. The friend comments that the partner is still being too extreme in training that poor puppy. But he adds that if the boy manages to resist, he could become a legend. That moment, the elderly man with the monocle shouts very loudly, drawing the attention of the young man who is below. He makes a cup shape with his hands and yells at the boy to remember only one important instruction. Down below, the apprentice listens attentively to the advice and clenches his fists, focused on his goal. Meanwhile, the raiders finally reach the monster and prepare to launch their attack. The bandit captain, whose face is completely bandaged, gives a wicked smile beneath his clothes. Then the leader orders that all defenders be eliminated without any mercy, to serve as an example. With that, the pirates shouted furiously, drawing their sharp swords and charging forward. One of the riders yells to make sure everyone remembers that this is the Black Shark Gang. They charge headlong towards the shell of the enormous creature, thirsting for a great massacre. Suddenly, the gang leader notices something strange on the ground and makes an expression of extreme surprise. Then a colossal explosion of sand throws the sandcastlers into the air, destabilizing their opponents. The captain's subordinate becomes desperate, unable to understand where the sudden impact came from. With the sand splitting in the middle, the horses fall and the villains scream desperately, begging for retreat. The dust engulfs the group of looters who are trying to escape that trap by any means necessary. Gawain recovers from the shock and angrily asks if his companion is all right amidst the chaos. The leader shouts, asking if it's a trap, but the ally assures him the path was clear. At that moment, the young master emerges swiftly from the shadows and immobilizes one of the villain's allies. The pirate is shocked to notice the boy's shadowy presence right behind her, making no sound. The captain looks back angrily and demands that the intruder take his hands off his female bandmate, but the apprentice is faster and delivers a precise blow that neutralizes the opponent in an instant. The leader of the raiders' eyes widen with hatred as he watches his ally being defeated so easily. He grinds his teeth furiously as dust and blood from the battle rise around him. The young man's silhouette stands out in the storm, showing that he's not messing around in this fight. With an extremely cold look, the boy wipes his face and announces that the next person can come forward. Enraged, a blue-haired swordsman lunges from behind the boy, delivering an energy slash. The rival warrior exits a swift strike, attempting to slice the hero with his gleaming blade. A destructive red blast cuts through the landscape, splitting the sand dunes in two upon impact. However, the attacker is completely confused when he sees that his powerful blow did not hit the intended target. He is then astonished to realize that the boy was quick enough to block his sword. The captain shouts loudly, calling out the name of the blue-haired warrior to warn of the danger. At that moment, the enemy in the air realizes they have made a serious mistake and panics. At that moment, the blue-haired swordsman attempts to attack from above with all his fury and his gleaming blade. The captain shouts furiously, calling the hero a brat and asking what kind of dirty trick that is. Suddenly, a huge blast of earth and wind explodes in front of the young man, startling his opponent. This catches the bandaged villain off guard, and he wonders if that defense is really just sand. Then the leader complains, saying that the boy spent all his time using cheap tricks against the gang. but the pirate lunges forward, delivering a fiery punch and shouting, asking if that's going to stop him. Then the captain runs and calls his ally to launch a double attack against the young defender. Suddenly, the apprentice executes a swift movement and strikes the blue swordsman, eliminating the threat. With this, the boy displays bright eyes and a cold expression even with his face dirty after the fight. At that moment, the boy remembered his mentor's words, urging him to pay close attention. The master said he was more concerned with taking a life than with facing the danger, but the old man warns him to keep one thing in mind, because those cruel men are not human. The young man questions this, and the experienced warrior confirms that the gang only does evil. He explains that villains take pleasure in hurting others and commit terrible crimes without motive. The master says that hundreds of innocent people suffered at their hands and asks if he should feel sorry for this gang. While listening to the advice, the apprentice treads firmly on the sand and makes an important decision for the fight. With that, the boy gripped the sword with determination, wondering if monsters like this deserve mercy. Annoyed by the boy's attitude, the leader of the raiders channels his red aura with intense rage. The bandaged villain rages, cursing the young man with a deep hatred gleaming in his red eyes. Suddenly, several sand spears begin to fall from the sky towards the pirate chief in a deadly attack. The apprentice watches as the earthen barrier corners the enemy, who complains that all he knows how to do is talk. At that point, the captain shouts furiously, asking if that silly sand would be enough to defeat him. He threatens the young man, saying he will slice him into pieces and throw him to the desert beasts to eat. The bandit continues to threaten suffering for his entire family, but the boy only offers a cold hello. At that moment, the young man with the sword in his hand calmly asks if those are his last words. The pirate chief's eyes widen in rage, his veins bulging with hatred. From up high, the master watches the scene, displaying a proud smile at his student's rapid progress. Holding the sword's hilt, the young man faces his wounded opponent and prepares for the final blow. With shining eyes, the boy says that the enemy is nothing more than utter desert trash. Breathless, the captain laughs with difficulty, complaining about seeing his companions being called useless. He laments the defeat of his fallen ally on the sand, unable to believe what has happened. Then the bandit looks at the defeated blue swordsman and feels the weight of his group's losses. The leader then states that both were strong warriors who would never be defeated by an amateur. Suddenly, a colossal energy begins to swirl around the boy, leaving the pirate astonished. A gigantic sand dragon forms behind the boy, causing the captain to recoil in great fear. Even terrified, the villain clenches his fists, gathering all his fire energy to fight back. He shouts that he will no longer fall for tricks and demands that the hero show his true power. That the bandit challenges the young man to fight like True Awakener, while dodging sand spikes. With that, the opponent advances furiously through the storm, demanding that the boy stop hiding. Then the pirate leaps, creating a destructive whirlwind of flames to attack the hero with everything he has. He slams the ground with all his concentrated force and shouts, asking what the next step will be. However, the captain's eyes widened in shock when he realized the blow had missed the boy. At that moment, the bandit looked desperately around, wondering where the apprentice had disappeared to. Suddenly, the hero reappears in a blind spot, launching a surprise attack with his sword. The villain notices the cut but wonders if the boy anticipated his attack or if it was all planned. But the captain smiles, saying that finally the opponent has entered the range of his blows. With this, the pirate manages to grab the young man and throws him to the ground with extreme violence, pressing the boy's chest with his foot. The bandit mocks his lack of combat experience. In this, the opponent warns that a single mistake on the battlefield is enough to cost one's life. The villain grabs the boy tightly by the neck and promises to make him dearly for every blow struck. At that moment, the leader of the raiders shouts furiously, declaring that the attack is in memory of his fallen ally. With that, the villain delivers a fiery and very dangerous punch towards the young apprentice. Suddenly, a massive explosion of fire engulfs the scene, creating a destructive shockwave. The force of the impact is so great that it opens a huge crater of smoke and dust in the middle of the sand. The furious captain shouts the names of several of his comrades and continues to strike relentlessly. Then he punches the boy angrily, yelling the names of the allies defeated in the battle. With a psychotic grin, the opponent warns that none of the boy's abilities will work under his grip. Holding the boy firmly, the villain tells him to accept his own weakness and prepare for the end. At that moment, the bandit raises his fist with all his might, preparing the final blow to end the fight. Suddenly, the leader is astonished to realize that the boy has simply slipped through his fingers. At that point, the young man manages to free himself in a brilliant way, sliding out of his clothes like sand. The opponent notices that the apprentice left the gauntlet behind only to escape the grip. Enraged, the bandit punches the air, cursing the boy, calling him a rat for running away in such a cowardly way. But the boy leaps into the air with agility and delivers a precise kick to his opponent's back, spitting blood. The captain realizes he made a grave mistake, letting the boy escape in the panic. Still, he notes that the boy's attack strength decreased considerably after he was no longer wearing the accessory. The opponent deduces that the special gauntlet was the secret behind the young man's immense destructive power. From this, he concludes that the boy controls the wind and uses the sand only to give physical force to his blows. With that, the bandaged villain rushes forward, preparing a physical attack against the hero. He lunges forward, delivering a violent punch, and shouts that he has finally figured out all the boy's tricks. Then the gang leader warns that without the gauntlet, the apprentice no longer has the same power as before. The bandit scoffs, saying that a wizard without an amplifier would never defeat a close quarters combatant, but the boy on the ground just flashes a wide grin at his opponent. Suddenly, a giant earthen spike emerges from the ground and pierces the captain through the back in an instant. The villain screams in pain, utterly shocked to realize the hero has aimed at his blind spot. The young man celebrates the success of his strategy, having patiently waited for the enemy to lower their guard. Furious and spitting blood, the captain rages with hatred for falling for the same trick for the second time. However, he begins to reflect and notices a strange detail. The boy is missing his gauntlet. The villain then realizes that it would be impossible for an ordinary wizard to manipulate that much sand without an amplifier. He is startled, wondering about the boy's true identity, as he sees him standing in the middle of the storm. Before he could do anything, the bandit was hit by more thorns of earth and became immobilized, spitting up a lot of blood. The opponent refuses to accept that he is losing his life to that young man. He thinks to himself that an ability to control the earth in this way is unusual. The villain realizes that the boy's power manipulates the environment around him in a terrifying way. He then despairs upon realizing that such a powerful and legendary gift shouldn't even exist. Suddenly, a colossal explosion of earth buries the captain, ending the battle in the desert once and for all. From atop the turtle, the old man with the monocle watches everything in horror. As he sees the boy controlling the sand, he remarks in astonishment that the hero uses the desert itself as both shield and weapon to win his duels. Then the old man says that the villain was experienced and the boy would be in great danger if he fought directly. He explains that the young man used his apparent weakness to lure his rival and attack at the right moment. Exhaustion hits hard, and the apprentice falls to his knees, spitting blood after using all his energy. Old man comments that it's incredible to see the boy develop combat techniques in the middle of a battle. Observing the boy with admiration, he concludes that this young man is definitely not ordinary. Beside him, the master continues silently observing the battlefield with a thoughtful gaze. At that point, The old man with the monocle turns to the warrior and asks where he found that prodigy. Down below, the boy tries to get up, staggering badly on the sand from so much physical exhaustion. He clutches his panting arm, commenting that the fight was dangerous and that he almost lost his life, even though he's injured. The boy manages a slight smile, wondering if the master will praise him for his victory. Suddenly, a frightening sound echoes through the desert, drawing the young man's attention, who looks to the side. At that moment, the boy is confronted with a huge crack opening in the sand and is paralyzed with fear. At that moment, the young man looked up in fright upon hearing a strange sound coming from above. Right after the battle ended, with that, the master points his sword and curses the boy, calling him a fool for making a silly mistake in the fight. At that point, the boy shouts, wanting to know what his mistake was and why he's being criticized again. The strong, white-haired warrior clenched his teeth, furious at his student's naivety. Then the elder reveals that the mistake was sparing the life of the enemy swordsman he left behind. The tutor warns that the spared opponent was ready to carry out a treacherous ambush. He asks firmly what the boy thought would happen if he turned his back on a rival. The boy lowers his head thoughtfully, realizing the seriousness of the mistake he made in the desert. At this point, the older man questions how long the apprentice will continue to be so naive in mortal combat. With that, the old man turns his back and coldly orders the hero to return immediately. He adds that with this weak mentality, the boy will end up dying very quickly. The man with the monocle listens to the sermon with a sad and worried look, concerned about the young man's future. The young woman also observes the scene in silence, feeling sorry for the harsh words the young man heard. Next, we see a close-up of the master's luxurious sword hilt as he walks away. The experienced warrior tells the boy to leave, while there's still time to give up everything. At that point, the hero stands with his back turned, reflecting on everything he has just heard in the desert. Suddenly, the man with the monocle approaches him and thanks him very kindly for his help. He explains that the inhabitants there are just simple blacksmiths and have no talent for fighting. The old man confesses that if it weren't for the boy's courage, many there would have lost their lives today. At that, the clan leader smiles, showing immense gratitude, and praises the young man's excellent work. Looking at the ground, the boy listens to the kind words and tries to process everything that has happened. Suddenly, the girl hugs the happy hero and exclaims, saying he was amazing against the pirates. She tells him not to pay attention to the grumpy master, because that old man always demands too much from everyone. But the apprentice looks away and realizes that the problem was actually something quite different. He reveals that he already knew the danger of being attacked by surprise by the enemy he spared in the battle. The hero confesses that he only pretended not to notice the threat, hoping that his adversary would disappear on its own. At this point, the boy admits that he knew about the rival group's wickedness and that they deserved severe punishment. He acknowledges that the real reason was a lack of courage to directly take someone's life. The young man regrets having acted cowardly simply to avoid the weight of guilt for eliminating an opponent. Then he understands that the master was right to reprimand him so harshly. The apprentice deduces that the tutor has seen many good people die for the exact same mistake. He realizes that the harsh scolding was the old man's twisted way of trying to protect his life. With a smile on his face, the hero concludes that the old man simply has great difficulty showing affection. Hearing this, the two blacksmiths were extremely surprised by the boy's positive reaction. The young woman finds it amusing and asks if the boy hit his head to speak of the master in that manner. The old man with the monocle notices the boy's attitude and reflects on his hesitations in combat. Then the girl pinches the hero's cheeks and says that the ordeal was too much for his age. The old man feels somewhat guilty seeing a young man struggling to protect adults who don't know how to fight. Then he invites everyone to eat and tells the boy to take a nice bath to relax from his tiredness. Meanwhile, the mentor rests inside the palace, calmly leafing through a red-covered book. From above, we see the strong warrior sitting calmly on the sofa after the excitement of the battle outside. Suddenly, the apprentice kicks the door open, yelling at the old man to stop pretending he's not in the room. The old man glances over the pages and sarcastically asks if the coward came to tell him he's leaving. The annoyed boy insists that the master underestimates him and warns that he won't break so easily. He claims that the difficult fight was nothing. But the old man just listens while sipping his tea. But the master notices an important detail and points out that the hero's hands are still trembling. The old man takes a sip and says that this is normal. Since only a fool would feel nothing after a battle, he explains that taking a life is never easy, and that this heavy guilt will haunt him forever. The elderly man advises that there is no need to forget this pain, or to get used to it. He concludes by saying that if the boy feels no guilt, he will become like the monsters he defeated. Devour says that the pain felt by the boy is merely proof that he is still a human being. The old warrior warns that if he can't withstand the pressure, he can still turn back right now. But young Zeon shouts angrily, stating that he already said he will not be broken under any circumstances. He assures his mentor that he can take care of himself and asks him to stop worrying so much. Zeon jokingly asks how he could leave that stubborn old man to die alone with no one around. The white-haired master stares at the boy in silence after hearing that bold statement. Then he gives a slight smile and affectionately calls his cheeky apprentice a brat. The boy says he would miss the noise, and the master slams his fist on the table in anger at his audacity. The boy screams desperately while the old man becomes even more irritated by the young man's antics. Elsewhere, a huge hammer is being forcefully struck, generating bright sparks throughout the room. Several blacksmiths work together to forge and stabilize a blade that shines intensely. One of the artisans focuses on the details using his special glasses while sparks fly around. A huge bonfire explodes, releasing a massive amount of energy in front of the workers. Kaylee remarks in amazement that she had never seen so many master blacksmiths gathered in one place. Pavilsa replies that this is natural, as everyone is working to stabilize Devour's sword. But the young woman screams in disbelief upon seeing how a single weapon can radiate so much energy for so many days. The elder explains that the sword called Crayon is a masterpiece born from one man's pure obsession. She confesses to being surprised that she has never seen anything like it, and doesn't believe that a human could have created such a thing. He reveals that the weapon possesses countless enchantments, and the souls of millions of magical beasts within. The old man with the monocle confesses that it looks much more like a living being than an ordinary sword. Curious, she asks who the creator might be, and the old man reveals that it was a man named Crayon. She is shocked to notice that the blacksmith and the weapon share the same name, and he tells her to see it as art. At that point, the elderly man with the monocle interrupts the conversation, calling for his granddaughter Kaylee to change the subject. He warns that the visitors will be leaving soon, and the young woman is startled to learn of Zeon's departure. The elder explains that Devour is not one to stand still, and must have already finished all the preparations. In the hall, the old man with the monocle asks what his companion is doing upon seeing the boy on the floor. Devour calmly replies that it's just training, but the other tells him to stop with that nonsense. Kaylee complains that he shouldn't treat the young man like that, but Devour says the boy does the same thing. Pavilsa announces that the adjustments to the sword are almost complete, and Devour excitedly celebrates the news. The master praises the speed of the work, and the elder tells him to stop by the workshop to pick up the item. Devour sincerely thanks his old friend, leaving the monocled old man very surprised. We notice a detail in the wide-eyed look of the old man, who is speechless in response to that unusual statement. He asks, confused, what the warrior just said while holding young Zeon down on the ground. The old man recalls that the last time the warrior had said they would probably never see each other again. He agrees, saying that he truly thought that would be their last meeting in this life. The old man thoughtfully reflects on how all the survivors of that day decided to flee from the past. He sadly acknowledges that they lived like cowards by trying to ignore the whole truth of that time. The old man knows that human life has become too heavy a burden to bear after the tragedy, but he recalls that Deodan was the only one who never looked back and kept moving forward. The old man feels immense admiration seeing his friend carry the weight of an entire century alone. But the white-haired warrior simply thanks his companion again in a very cheerful manner. The strong master nods, smiling broadly, and says he hopes to see his old friend again soon. The elderly man with the monocle is astonished by the promise of a reunion reflected in his special glasses. Looking to the side, he sees young Zeon give a friendly and kind smile before leaving. The old man smiled slightly, finally understanding the true reason behind that change. In the distance, Kaylee waves excitedly, shouting that she too is eagerly waiting to see the group again. 2 weeks pass, and we see old Pavilsa sitting alone atop a desolate mountain. The old man sighs thoughtfully, noting how quickly time has passed since the visitors left. Suddenly he announces that he can see his granddaughter approaching from behind and scares the girl instantly. The grandfather asks how long she's going to keep playing those childish games with him there. Pavilsa notices that her granddaughter is acting childishly and asks if something is bothering her at that moment. Kaylee looks thoughtfully to the side and confesses to her grandfather that she just feels a little empty inside. She remembers young Zeon's excitement upon receiving his new protective breastplate made from Queen Ant. The boy was overjoyed to discover that he would receive all those special magical items. Zeon had a lot of fun storing everything in the subspace, and even jokingly invited the master to come in there too. The girl confesses that he seemed like a cheerful child and hopes continues smiling like that along the way. Kaylee jokes that she looks exactly like her grandfather, but he replies that she's still 50 years behind. Then, the old man with the monocle becomes serious and asks his granddaughter to help the young man if they meet again in the future. She readily accepts, promising to give the hero the best equipment she has ever built in her life. Pavilsa closes her eyes calmly, knowing full well that she will indeed cross paths with Zeon again. He takes a sip of his tea, thinking that helping Deodan's hair is a way to repay an old debt. The elder knows that all of humanity owes much to the master as he watches the great tortoise continue its journey. Somewhere in the desert, the boy takes a painful blow to the head and is completely stunned by the impact. Zaun complains, crying with a huge bump on his forehead, saying that the old man is going to end up diminishing his intelligence. Deodan complains about the noise the boy was making, and the boy says he was only hunting monsters as he was told. Annoyed, the young man points to the enormous sword and jokes that even the weapon thinks the master is ridiculous. But the old man gives him another whack on the head, assuring him that the blow from the other side will cure his stupidity. The boy ends up buried face down in the sand, his head smoking, and realizes that things aren't quite as they seem. Mentor kneels before the sword, feigning disappointment, and Zeon, from the ground, orders him to stop talking nonsense. Lying on the sand, the young man reflects that at least he managed to expend all his magical energy in that training session. He knows that mana functions like a muscle and needs to be pushed to its limit to expand dramatically. All this rush to get stronger is due to the difficult fight against the dangerous raider last time. Zaun recalls that this was his first real fight against another awakened being, and that he ended up being defeated. The hero confesses that he felt a lot of anger at his own weakness, and the carelessness that almost cost him his life. He looks at the defeated monsters and realizes that even those beasts fought more bravely to survive. The boy doesn't want to feel that horrible frustration again and promises to get stronger no matter what. The boy decides to focus on his future potential while trying to get used to Kaylee's powerful gauntlet. He examines the item, remembering that the fire element would make him stronger, and regrets not having picked anything up sooner. The boy wonders if he would be able to reach the master's level if he could also speak with his weapon. Seeing his mentor whispering to himself with his sword, the boy playfully wonders if the old man is going through menopause. Deodan asks if the boy has finished extracting the energy core, and the boy confirms by wiping away the blood. The old white-haired warrior gazes at the horizon and calmly announces that night is beginning. The boy holds the shining jewel with curiosity while listening to his mentor's advice about the desert. Xian throws the mana core into the gauntlet's subspace and wonders if the sun has been setting faster lately. The master explains that they have moved to a different region and now need to use the sun's movement to guide their way. The boy asks if the old man is telling him to find shelter to sleep in, but the master denies it immediately. Deodan gives a wry smile and informs the young man that they have just received a fine welcoming delegation. The two climb a dune and come across a gigantic dark rock formation rising from the sand. Young Xian observes the place, intrigued, and wonders if it's an abandoned mine or just an ordinary rock. The mentor laughs and explains that the visible rocky promontory is actually just a small part of a mountain. He excitedly recounts that the buried mountain is so massive that it even keeps dangerous sandworms away. Boy observes the master's sudden excitement with a bewildered look on his face, not understanding the reason for so much joy. Suddenly, the old man leaps high towards the top of the large rock, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Xian looks up impressed and deduces that the mentor is simply excited to explore a new region. The young man sighs warily and grumbles to himself that taking care of the elderly is truly enormous work. Next, the young man creates a pillar of earth beneath his feet to launch himself swiftly to the top of the mountain. Upon reaching the top, the boy sees the old man lying down resting and asks if they haven't switched mental ages. The white-haired master takes a strip of very tasty dried meat and extends his hand to offer it to the young man. The two sit side by side on the rocky ground and begin to eat the dried meat in silence under the dark sky. The young man chews his food thoughtfully, savoring that rare moment of calm with his grumpy master. The mentor breaks the silence and asks directly how the boy is managing to endure the harsh life in the desert. The young man says he's managing thanks to his teachings, but admits he still has a long way to go to become strong. Xian says it's impossible to feel strong traveling with the master, and the old man complains that he only learned to flatter for nothing. The boy remains silent for a brief moment, his gaze thoughtful, while the wind blows strongly over the rocks. The boy asks if it will be much longer before he masters the sand, and the master replies that he will be ready when he cuts through a storm. Xian looks down, understanding the gigantic scale of the challenge and the absurd level of power he needs to achieve. The master warns that if the apprentice continues along that sandy path, he will make an important discovery. The old man reveals that there is a very dangerous dungeon nearby that can help the young man improve his skills. The old man stares at the student seriously and asks bluntly if he really has the courage to go to that terrible place. Excited, the boy smiles broadly, wanting to leave immediately, but the tutor simply tells him to go to sleep. Suddenly, the scene changes and shows people running desperately in the darkness of the night as if fleeing from something. Hearing a strange noise, the young man quickly gets up and asks if it could be a dangerous magical beast nearby. The boy asks if he should go hunt the creature, and the master mocks him, asking if he'd rather go befriend the monster. But desperate voices begin to echo in the dark night, drawing the young man's attention, who is surprised by the noise. He notices a group running for cover from danger and wonders if some creature is chasing them. The two look down and spot a group of swift, pointy-eared female warriors fleeing desperately across the sand. The apprentice's eyes widen as he realizes the fugitives are elves, and he is shocked to see that race in the middle of that desert.